Night settles over the deserts and mountaintops where telescopes keep their slow vigil. Sensors sip photons that left their homes before anyone now living was born. A pattern flickers, almost nothing, a grain of light nudging a line of code, and the quiet room grows attentive. The name that drifts through the chilled air is small, almost casual, a shorthand that sounds like a shrug. 3I, a third stranger, a whisper stitched to Atlas, that tireless wide-field sentinel. The syllables carry a shiver, because objects like this do not arise from the familiar well of the solar system. They cross the dark like drifting seeds, unclaimed by the sun, and whatever they choose to reveal is usually less than what they keep. Far from this room, cities do not know that something faint has bent a catalogue. Lovers talk beneath street lamps, buses breathe, the smell of rain hangs on warm pavement. Above them, orbiting eyes rake the dusk for motion, while ground-based cameras blink through long exposures. The sky looks calm, patient, indifferent. Only in the data does the tremor show. A tracklet that barely coheres, a displacement that refuses the easy grammar of bound orbits, a candidate that unspools possibilities faster than certainty can catch them. No trumpet sounds, no public flair, only the soft click of a line added to a cue and the slow gathering of attention that might, if the night cooperates, turn a whisper into a voice. The first interstellar visitor came as a shock, an elongated shard that moved with an ease that confused many. The second came brighter, wearing a coma, like a banner, plainly cometry, as if to soothe nerves. A third would not surprise those who wait in the dark. Yet the threshold between rumour and record remains guarded by discipline. A name is not a confirmation. A detection is not a declaration. The intimacy between eyes and sky is built on restraint as much as excitement. In the control rooms and server halls, that restraint looks like careful code. It looks like algorithms that resist seduction, that assign probabilities rather than proclamations, that require repetition before belief. Beyond the glass and the screens, the object draws a pale line against infinity. It has no interest in anxiety, no purpose that can be tested. It simply moves through the sun's faint tide, borrowing a little heat, shrugging off a little dust, crossing a sheet of space that contains us the way a bay contains a lantern. The thought that it might be the third is only a thought, yet thoughts can grip. They pull at old questions. What else wanders between the stars, too small to sparkle, too dark to announce itself, content to pass without leaving anything but a tiny correction in the way gravity writes its long sentences? In the pooled memory of those who watch, there is a rhythm that never turns into song. It is the rhythm of partial frames, of cloud interference, of a signal that vanishes and then returns with a slightly different face. It is the rhythm of processing cues and error bars, of the weak smile that means not yet, try again. Patience lives here. Not the glamorous kind, but the patience of custodians who understand that most of the universe arrives as a whisper. The romance of discovery, when it comes, rides on the back of thousands of low, ordinary tasks. A lens kept clean, a sensor kept cold, a calibration repeated at an hour when most lights are off. The whisper is earned. A faint anxiety leans in anyway. It is not fear of catastrophe. It is the humbler fear of blindness. If a third interstellar traveller can slip into the margins so easily, how many others thread the same path, unremarked? There is a feeling, hard to name, that the cosmos has a private life. It carries on with trajectories that never graze human awareness. It hosts collisions that unfold without an audience. Astrophysics can describe the probabilities, can sketch the distributions, can assign tidy symbols to volumes and velocities, yet the night keeps its counsel. The data stream that lights these rooms is a river made of moments when the universe and the instrument agree to touch. Everything else rushes by unseen. A whispered candidate concentrates this feeling. In that fragile state, before a designation sets, the mind is free to imagine. A shard of primordial ice, older than any recorded myth. A crusty pebble ejected from a deserted system where the last planet cooled in silence. A lively fragment still outgassing, still turning sunlight into motion, tracing a curve that tells a story of heat and stress and chemical memory. It might be none of these. It might be an artifact of noise, a playful glitch, The watchful accept this possibility without bitterness. They have learned that humility is the only armor that fits. The broader world has its own whispers, rumors of lists that are not public, pages where probabilities sit like sleeping dogs, unbothered until a number crosses a line. The idea that somewhere a quiet ledger tracks threats and near threats, that analysts with careful eyes grade the sky in tongues of risk, stirs curiosity. It is a natural human instinct to seek the hidden room, the sealed envelope, the door that opens only if one knows how to knock. Yet the truth of vigilance is more ordinary and more demanding. It is a web of tools and protocols, a choreography of hands and codes, a promise to ask the next question, even when the answer to the previous one took all night. A rumor like 3i does more than awaken the memory of earlier visitors. It sharpens the appetite for context. What does it mean to live in a planetary system that is not an island? What does it mean that the space between stars is not empty, but busy, and that even a busy space appears empty most of the time? The senses are slow to change. The species grew up under a dome that seemed permanent. Now that dome reveals itself to be a lane of traffic. Slow, sparse, nearly silent. Yes, but traffic all the same. A different posture is required. Not a crouch of fear, not a sprint of panic, but a calm alertness that can last for decades. In one of the darkened rooms, a technician warms her hands around a mug and watches a screen fill with tiny white wounds. Most of them are ordinary artifacts, dust motes, little flares of our own atmosphere. One of them might be the thing that tugged the algorithm. She knows better than to fall in love with it. She annotates, she cues, she checks the clock, she listens to the breathing of the cooling system, a low and constant assurance that the tools are awake. There is a comfort in the ritual. The sky will not be hurried. The instruments can only ask politely. The night answers in its own time. Outside, the stars burn with gorgeous indifference. The faint candidate moves whether it is named or not. The earth turns not because someone waits at a keyboard, but because turning is what it does. The object, if it is real, if it is unbound, if it is indeed a stranger from elsewhere, will make its small impression on human understanding and then be gone. It may leave only a graph that shifts by a breath, a footnote in a catalogue, a memory in the minds of those who watch. That is enough. Discovery does not owe drama. Truth can be thin, can be barely visible, can arrive without fanfare. It still remakes the map. The whisper matters because it invites a certain tenderness toward the sky. Not worship, not fear, not conquest, but an attentive love. The kind that cleans lenses and writes code and steps outside in the cold. The kind that does not insist, but invites. The kind that understands how much lives beyond reach and listens anyway. If a third visitor passes, the record will hold it long enough for the species to glance up and say, gently, yes, you were here. If no visitor comes, the attentiveness itself becomes an offering. In either case, the night remains vast, patient, more full of paths than the mind can grasp, and the watchers remain at their posts, content with a whisper that asks them to look more carefully at everything. The first hint arrives as a pattern that refuses to settle. Wide-field survey cameras harvest the sky in patient grids, each exposure a sheet of night pinned to coordinates and time. Software breaks these sheets into candidates, sifts distractions from what truly moves, and shapes faint points into tracklets that predict where a point should appear next. On one shift, the automatic filters place a small cluster into a waiting room inside a server where millions of such fragments rest. A scheduler examines brightness, rate of motion, and sky position, and pushes the most promising up the queue. A telescope nudges, trades one patch of darkness for another, and opens its pupils again. Across the Pacific, a different observatory follows a similar rhythm, its schedule algorithm trained to close the loop on fast movers. The night is ordinary. The habit of the instruments is exquisite. Calibration frames polish away bias. Dark frames cool the sensors into smooth obedience. Stars in the field provide the lattice for precise astrometry. Then something tiny shifts. The predicted spot is a little off. The residuals for a few positions widen. A second look tightens them again, but not enough to restore comfort. The software that handles this ambiguity is practiced. It does not jump. It asks for more. The name attached to the survey that caught the point does not matter as much as the path it takes from camera to catalogue. The pipeline sends a notice to the Minor Planet Center. The object joins the near-Earth object confirmation page where hungry eyes check coordinates and plan follow-up. All of this happens with a calm cadence, as if night itself were an office with well-kept routines. A pair of modest telescopes lock on from different longitudes. Both report positions within minutes of each other. Astrometrists compare the scatter and trim away outliers. A preliminary orbit calculation emerges, fragile and untrustworthy, but enough to guide the next impressions. At a desk softened by a small pool of light, a scientist checks a flag set by the rapid screening tool built for such moments. The tool is quiet most nights. When it speaks, it uses numbers, the language of caution. It notes the high apparent speed for the given sky plane geometry. It notes the direction relative to the motions typical of long-period comets. It assigns a broad prior because first nights are treacherous. It also adds a whisper regarding eccentricity, a value already testing the upper edge of what gravity binds when the data are this sparse. The name attached to the survey that caught the point does not matter as much as the path it takes from camera to catalogue. The pipeline sends a notice to the Minor Planet Center. The object joins the near-Earth object confirmation page where hungry eyes check coordinates and plan follow-up. All of this happens with a calm cadence, as if night itself were an office with well-kept routines. A pair of modest telescopes lock on from different longitudes. Someone adds more weight to the most precise station, and a slightly different story appears. If the eccentricity continues to rise with added data, the designation team will have a conversation it has only had twice in a lifetime. Even the most disciplined room experiences a ripple when a number hints at something unbound. There is no public statement. There is no headline. There is a cascade of quiet tasks. A duty scientist confirms that no known satellite streak could mimic the path. A mover is checked against a catalogue of geostationary residues. A statistical reviewer tests whether the object could be a blended pair misread by software. Each gate holds until the evidence insists. Most nights the gates keep their dignity and the world remains stable. Some nights, a gate opens with a soft click that sounds like an invitation. The call goes out for more astrometry. A network of professional and skilled amateur observers responds. Southern skies contribute arc seconds that sharpen solutions. Photometry arrives, rough at first, then improved with careful comparison stars. The light curve is shallow, perhaps indicating a fairly symmetrical body, or perhaps the aspect angle is unhelpful. A cautious note tags possible cometary behavior, though no coma is resolved at the seeing available. If outgassing is present, it will be subtle, the kind that moves a small object without painting a dramatic veil around it. Radar specialists watch the ephemeris, but shake their heads. The distance remains too large, and the brightness too small for a useful bounce. They keep a slot ready anyway, because an unexpected swell in brightness at closer range can happen. The planetary defense offices track the orbital solution in parallel, not because the sky is about to fall, but because stewardship demands it. A cross-check with survey coverage maps raises a different question. If this object exists, at this magnitude, and this speed, how many others like it slip between survey fields, too faint on one night, too fast on another, lost in the shutter gaps or star trails that no algorithm can fully erase? Administrators see only dashboards. A tile lights up beside a label that reads screening priority. The color is chosen to calm the eye rather than to alarm it. Inside the algorithms, the object now joins a set of known fast movers whose solutions once looked similar. Some were comets with high but finite eccentricities. Some were noisy datasets that pretended to be special until more data showed a polite, long-period return. A comparison engine overlays the new path with families of prior paths and issues a score that is neither a yes nor a no. It is a humbling maybe, which is all science can give at this stage. In the background, a less glamorous task begins. Teams review pointing histories, hunt for serendipitous recovery images where the object might have crossed a field weeks earlier. Archives that hold oceans of sky are asked to reveal a fleck. The success of this method depends on patience and luck. When a recovery appears, it instantly stretches the arc by days or months, and the orbit becomes an honest shape rather than a guess dressed as a curve. When no recovery appears, the night must do the work alone. The cadence tightens. Exposure times adjust to avoid trailing losses. The sky is coaxed to give back a little more signal. Amid the work, one fact grows heavier. If the eccentricity holds above unity after multiple nights with good geometry, the label that fits is interstellar. That label carries no poetry in a spreadsheet. It carries a promise of comparative planetology across light years. It carries the chance to sample chemistry that formed under different stellar winds and radiation histories. It also carries the knowledge that the visitor will not linger. The hyperbolic path is a refusal to join the family of planets and comets bound to the Sunday. The visitor will cross the stage and depart with the same composure with which it arrived. The discovery phase is in truth a construction phase. Observers hammer position into position until a structure stands. Analysts thicken the walls with error modeling. Photometrists decorate the interior with colors that hint at composition. Elsewhere, dynamicists sketch the motion backward through the galactic tide to imagine where such a traveler might have wandered before. Each contribution changes the object slightly in the shared imagination. The object itself remains indifferent, but the model becomes finer, closer to something that can be tested against the next image. At dawn, a summary moves across a private channel to those who need to plan the next shift. It reads like a weather report for a coastline, where storms are rare but not impossible. Probability of hyperbolic motion remains non-trivial. Brightness trend suggests small nucleus or strong albedo. No confirmed activity detected at current resolution. Follow-up required within 12 hours to prevent loss. The last line concentrates the mind. Loss is the natural state. Retention is what requires effort. Everyone involved knows this and returns to their instruments with a quiet sense of duty. The catalogues do not blink in a human sense. They absorb and emit. They keep watch without looking. When an entry joins under a provisional name, it does not know its fate. It might be promoted to a place of honor in the story of the solar system. It might be demoted to a curiosity no one remembers. What matters is that the system built to catch it worked as intended. The web of surveys, confirmation pages, ranking tools, and analysts handled uncertainty with care. In that care, a kind of respect is visible. The respect does not attach to any one object. It attaches to the practice of listening well when the universe speaks in small voices. Shock begins as arithmetic that refuses to sit quietly. Orbital fits seek a tidy ellipse, the familiar cradle of Kepler's grammar, yet the equations return a value greater than 1 for eccentricity. A line of digits crosses the line between bound and unbound. The shape is not a closed loop, but a curve that slashes through the solar neighborhood and keeps going. The mind reaches for reasons that would restore comfort. Measurement error, star catalog offsets, clock drift, all the little gremlins of precision work. Corrections are applied with care. The number still refuses to bow. Velocity supplies a second jolt. At infinite remove, away from the sun's pull, the fit implies a leftover speed. The quantity dynamicists call V infinity. The value is not trivial. It speaks of an approach that carries momentum from another star's garden. Local comets do not arrive with such reserve. They fall inward from the Oort cloud with nearly zero energy at infinity, surrendering to the sun like leaves surrender to a river. This traveler keeps a private engine of inertia. The words used in the lab are dry, but the feeling is not. A landscape of expectation tilts. The Tisserand parameter with respect to Jupiter adds another layer of refusal. For bodies bred within the Sun's family, Jupiter acts as a metronome for classification. The parameter sits near familiar ranges for long-period comets and short-period families. For the intruder, the number drifts into a regime that marks a life independent of Jupiter's shepherding. The great planet loses its grip. A gate that normally sorts the solar swarm into categories cannot hold this new piece. The mathematicians do not gasp. They underline the result and run it again. A subtler astonishment follows from the absence of a visible coma. Fresh ice arriving from the deep should weep vapor in sunlight. Even a small body should paint a veil that softens starlight behind it. Image after image shows a point source, star-sharp within the limits of seeing. Photometry hints at slight variation, perhaps a modest rotation, perhaps facets on a small object, perhaps nothing at all. Meanwhile, the fit to positions improves if a gentle push is introduced, a non-gravitational term that acts like thrust from gas. The paradox is elegant. Motion says outgassing. Images say silence. Thermal models step in like careful tailors. They dress the tiny world with assumptions about albedo, spin state, thermal inertia, and solar distance. Sublimation curves for water and carbon monoxide are laid across the temperatures like tracing paper. The result says that at the observed distance, water should sleep, carbon monoxide might stir, and carbon dioxide sits on the edge of courtesy. A small area of vents could produce the needed impulse without raising a visible coma, if dust grains are heavy or cling to the surface. The hypothesis is neat, though it must live amid rivals. Another proposal calls upon sunlight as a sculptor of motion. Radiation pressure is a wind that pushes everything, but the effect thirsts for area relative to mass. A thin geometry magnifies that wind. If the body is a wafer rather than a chunk, the push could rival a breath of gas. Spectral colors complicate this image. The measured slope leans toward a red that suits organics weathered by cosmic rays, not a gleaming sail. Yet coatings exist that can darken while remaining light. The parameter that matters is beta, the ratio of radiative push to gravity. If beta sits in a narrow range, the trajectory can mimic the observed drift. The analysis hangs like a mobile, each weight requiring another to balance it. Geometry writes its own shock into the sky. The incoming direction lies near the solar apex, the heading toward which the sun moves through the local cloud of stars. Such a corridor is a busy lane for dust and debris freed from other systems. At the same time, selection effects carve bias into discovery. Surveys are more efficient for specific angles and speeds. A few degrees of sky can act like a funnel for attention. To learn whether the path hints at origin or only at our own habits, the community must collect many intruders. With so few, each orientation feels like a hint placed on purpose. Brightness introduces a scale that tightens the throat. Size estimates, carried out with modest albedo assumptions, suggest a body no larger than a building and perhaps much smaller. A traveller so slight, crossing an ocean of space, implies an uncountable shoal of faint cousins. The shock is not in the tiny stone itself, but in the census it implies. If the density of such debris is high, then interstellar exchange is constant and intimate. Systems share their rubble like distant relatives exchanging letters. The letters are thin, unaddressed, and relentless. Energy vectors add another ingredient that refuses to blend into silence. Transforming heliocentric fits into barycentric coordinates, and then into the frame of the local standard of rest, reveals a residual glide that resists being called an accident. The speed relative to nearby stars is ordinary, not a gunshot, but ordinary here still means faster than the escape from the sun by a comfortable margin. Scenarios multiply. Ejection during planet formation. Slingshot from a dynamic dance with a giant planet. Tidal stripping in a crowded birthplace near a stellar nursery. Every option builds a story about where and when such a shard might have been born. Time becomes the cruelest aspect of surprise. The window for the closest pass is short. Spectroscopic campaigns seek signatures of carbon chains, water bands, perhaps cyanide lines that often accompany comets. The signal sits on the edge of detectability. Integration times lengthen. The Earth's rotation interrupts. Weather takes its tax. The object recedes. Each night, without a spectral fingerprint, stretches the paradox between motion and appearance. Science can tolerate tension for a long while, but patience is a muscle that tires when the scene retreats toward distance. Models of shape feed the unease. Light curve amplitude remains flat within noise, which would suit either a sphere or a facet aligned by chance. A tumbling state could smear variation into a bland average. Non-principal axis rotation becomes a refuge for possibility. If the body tumbles, the angle of sunlight changes like a slow candle around a sculpture. Outgassing jets, if present, would turn on and off as vents face and avert. Such behavior might create the observed push with minimal dust. It might also be wishful geometry written over thin data. Risk analysts experience a different flavor of shock. Not the fear of collision, which calculations show to be remote for this path, but the realization that detection thresholds sit uncomfortably close to invisibility for objects of this size. The point makes an argument without raising its voice. Detection required specific luck in timing, sky coverage, and software tuning. If the traveler had arrived a few weeks later, a seasonal gap might have hidden it completely. If it had been one magnitude fainter, it would have been a rumor born in noise and then forgotten. The conclusion feels like a private rebuke. Philosophy enters not as decoration, but as an attempt to name the emotion that facts provoke. The solar system has long been imagined as a household with good locks. The metaphor fails, the home has no door. Space flows through the rooms like weather. Other systems breathe onto the porch. Stones with foreign histories drift past the window. For a species wrapped in narratives of border and belonging, the encounter teaches a gentler humility. Belonging is local. Exchange is universal. The distinction does not shrink the wonder. It enlarges it. Technical staff register this mood in quieter terms. They speak of residuals that do not decay as fast as expected when gravity alone holds the pen. They speak of priors adjusted to include a class that did not exist in the software when it was written. They speak of interface additions that provide labels for unbound visitors. A database absorbs new fields with the composure of a ledger that expects the unexpected. The shock has no fireworks. It takes the shape of a form that now includes an option called interstellar. A final note settles like a feather on an instrument panel. The strangeness is not exotic in the sense of fantasy. The strangeness lies in ordinary physics, exercised along a path not seen before. Gravity does what gravity does. Light pushes as light always pushes. Ice evaporates when warm and sleeps when cold. The surprise arises from the configuration. The history lived in another planetary nursery, the sculpture of time and chance. A small visitor forces the large family to redraw the margins of expectation. The redraw is graceful. It also cuts deep. Data pours in like slow rain, each drop measured, each drop placed where it strengthens the shape of a thing that does not care to be shaped. The orbit solution settles as the arc length grows, and the curve through space becomes crisp enough to serve as scaffold for deeper work. Photometrists bring their careful hands to the task. They build a light curve from nights that were never meant to speak to one another, a concert assembled from distant instruments. The variation is small, a few tenths at most, which suggests either a compact body or a geometry that refuses to display its profile. A Fourier fit hints at a rotation period that could be hours rather than minutes, but a second solution sits nearby, just as plausible, and the data show no favoritism. Non-principal axis rotation remains in play, the kind that smears clean rhythms into velvet. Infrared watchers step forward with longer wavelengths that taste heat instead of color. Their measurements do not blaze with certainty, yet they ease a boundary. If the surface reflects as darkly as many small bodies do, then the object is modest in size, perhaps tens of meters rather than hundreds. If the surface proves brighter, the same brightness could be painted by a smaller stone. Thermal inertia enters the conversation with a quiet suggestion. A surface that does not keep heat well would fit both the absence of a bright thermal signature and a brisk response to sunlight. The conclusion tightens the scale and leaves the room they always leave for surprise. Spectroscopic campaigns attempt to catch a signature that would betray chemistry. Slit spectrographs bite into the night, patient as watchmakers, while signal climbs by fractions. The expected bands of simple carbon chains fail to rise above noise. Water's fingerprints sit below detection at the present distance. A few observers report a faint slope that reddens toward longer wavelengths, consistent with organics that have known the bite of cosmic rays. There is no strong absorption that would declare a specific mineral. These negatives are not silence, they are thresholds that put fences around possibility. If gas is present, it is shy. If dust is released, the grains are large enough to stay close, or they never leave at all. The variation is small, a few tenths at most, which suggests either a compact body or a geometry that refuses to display its profile. A Fourier fit hints at a rotation period that could be hours rather than minutes, but a second solution sits nearby, just as plausible, and the data show no favoritism. Non-principal axis rotation remains in play, the kind that smears clean rhythms into velvet. The coat need not be thick. A film of altered grains a few microns deep can make a world look old. Searches for a tail continue, even when the coma remains stubbornly point-like. Deep stacking of images achieves surface brightness limits that push past routine survey depths. Nothing reveals itself beyond the stellar point spread function, no soft fan that would betray dust lofted by heat. This lack becomes a number, dust production less than a value that can be written in kilograms per second. The number is not zero, only small. A handful of vents, the size of rooms, could remain hidden and still move the path by a whisper. The path does move by a whisper. The orbit solver likes a tiny non-gravitational term that decays with distance from the sun, as expected for something that breathes only when warmed. Radiation pressure is tested alongside gas, not as a romantic metaphor but as a term in an equation. The ratio of radiative push to gravity sits in the fit like a dial that someone might turn with a fingertip. Turned too high, the dial demands a sail, a device so thin it would surprise even dreamers. Turned too low, the dial denies the observed drift. The acceptable setting is not a broad meadow. It is a narrow path, where a highly porous body or a sheet-like geometry could live without offending the colors recorded by spectrographs. Some investigators favor this path for its austerity. Others prefer small jets in shadowed clefts that vent without glitter. Both camps plant their flags carefully. Both accept that the ground under their feet could shift with a single better night. Backtracing through the galaxy begins once the orbit in the solar frame earns respect. Dynamicists integrate the path backward to the moment before the sun's influence grew strong. That moment takes the traveler into the local standard of rest with a modest, peculiar velocity. The vector points near a region that contains no obvious progenitor, no obvious young system whose outflows could provide a clean trail. The conclusion is not origin but history. The interstellar medium acts as a slow river. Debris ejected during ancient planet formation meets stellar passages, molecular clouds, and tides from the galaxy itself. Memory of birthplace dissolves into the statistical texture of the neighborhood. Searches for precovery images mine the cold vaults of surveys that watch these skies when no one asked them to look for this visitor. The success rate for such hunts is always low, yet the cost of looking is small compared to what a found frame could buy. A single shallow smear on a dated image would stretch the arc and crush uncertainty. Weeks pass inside hours, a collage of prior nights displayed against coordinates. The most promising candidates turn out to be streaks from satellites that wandered through. The vault gives no gift. The present must suffice. Radar remains out of reach, which is not a failure but an important boundary. The echo would have fixed size and provided a priceless spin vector. Without it, size floats within an interval and spin rests on the soft pillow of photometric inference. Analysts turn to modeling with bracing honesty. If the body is compact and dense, the non-gravitational term must be driven primarily by gas. If the body is fluffy or thin, sunlight can shoulder more of the push. A porosity as high as those seen in cometary dust aggregates is not absurd for a small, weak stone that survived ejection from a distant system. The idea paints a toy world that is more foam than rock, an architecture built by gentle sticking and preserved by the cold. Risk frames live at the edges of this deeper look. Not collision risk, which remains negligible, but the risk that the catalogue undercounts its faintest members by an uncomfortable margin. Coverage maps show blind spots where weather, cadence, and moon glare open holes that an object like this could walk through without leaving a footprint. Simulation teams build synthetic skies, filled with unseen intruders, then drive survey software across them. The recovery rate comes back, bruised at the low end of brightness. The result becomes an argument for better cadence, for thermal infrared space telescopes that see warm bodies against cold space, for radar systems that can reach farther. This argument does not scold. It invites investment in clarity. A compositional whisper arrives from the ultraviolet. Short wavelengths, harsh on detectors, can be kind to certain gas species. A search for specific bands yields upper limits rather than signatures. Those limits still matter. They tell a story in negative space. Any venting must prefer species that hide well, or the gas must be dust-poor and tightly collimated, or the body is small enough that only a little vapor is needed to explain the path. An alternative beckons from mechanics. If the object tumbles in a way that favors headwinds and tailwinds of sunlight across uneven texture, radiation and thermal recoil can conspire to write a drift that mimics jet physics without a jet. The sky gives one rare gift at high phase angle, a geometry where the object sits near the line to the sun and the surface glows with the opposition surge. The brightness rises faster than a simple model predicts. Coherent backscatter offers a reason, tiny grains reflecting in chorus rather than alone. This implies a surface with microfacets packed in ways that emphasize collective light tricks. Such a surface would also clamp down on fine dust and discourage generous comi, matching the failure to detect a tail. The pieces never lock perfectly, but they begin to sit comfortably near one another. An origin hypothesis gains texture from planetary formation models. Young systems eject vast numbers of small bodies as giant planets migrate and rearrange orbits. Most of that rubble becomes the anonymous background. A fraction passes near other stars and trades energy again, a process that smooths velocities toward ordinary values in the local cloud. The visitor fits inside this broad pattern like a single leaf in a long autumn. Its specific path tells little about its tree, but its presence confirms the season. Numbers converge enough to write a brief portrait that can fit in a scientist's pocket, a small object with a dark to moderate albedo, rotation period likely on the order of hours, with a possible tumble that smears amplitude. No coma detected to deep limits, yet a thin non-gravitational term present in the motion, compatible with either subtle outgassing or radiative effects on a low-mass geometry. Size likely within tens of meters, density uncertain but bounded by the need to survive both ejection long ago and recent solar heating. Approach speed consistent with a population of debris wandering between stars. Nothing in this portrait asks physics to invent new laws. Everything in it asks for more light. The deeper investigation has not turned a whisper into a shout. It has turned a guess into an outline that others can color when instruments grow sharper. What the data revealed most clearly is not a secret about a single stone, but a lesson about the sea it swam through. Interstellar space is not an empty stage. It is a field strewn with small archives, each a durable syllable from a distant conversation. To read more of them, the species must decide that the skill of reading is worth the cost of better eyes. Uncertainty expands like breath on cold glass. Small errors in position inflate into broad fans of possible futures, and the projection into tomorrow becomes more fog than line. The orbit solution looks stable until it is asked to predict beyond a week, where it loosens and frays. Covariance ellipses stretch along the path, thin near the present and fat toward the edges, painting a corridor where the traveler could pass. Analysts tighten weightings, retrim outliers, and still the corridor resists, shrinking to the tidy ribbon everyone prefers. The object insists on being a lesson in how little light can say. A drift term that once sat comfortably begins to wobble. The gentle, non-gravitational push needed to match the path refuses to stay constant. One night the fit is crisp with a modest coefficient. Another night, the same coefficient overcorrects and leaves the model gasping. Thermophysical explanations step forward with confident diagrams. Sublimation is not a steady faucet. Vents can be patchy, shaded by small cliffs, turned on by sunlight, striking a corner at just the right moment. Heat can crawl beneath the surface and emerge hours later, writing a lag between cause and effect. The math can absorb all of this, but each added parameter is an invitation to ambiguity. With so few photons, even honest complexity begins to resemble cleverness. Rotation complicates everything. If the body tumbles, then sunlight meets changing facets and thermal recoil changes direction like a weather vane. The Yarkovsky push, subtle but decisive for small stones, needs a stable spin to predict. In a tumble, it becomes a kaleidoscope of tiny kicks that cannot be averaged over short arcs. The Yorp effect, which can torque small bodies into new spin states, whispers its own mischief at these scales. When models allow the spin to wander, the fit improves, but at the cost of confidence that any future state will behave. Prediction must then accept that the dynamics are not just non-linear, they are moody. Observational cadence deepens the trouble. Windows close for weather across several longitudes at once. The moon climbs bright and lavish, and drowns the faint signal under silver. A scheduled maintenance pause arrives at the worst possible hour. Gaps appear where a single measurement could have pinned a branch of the future. Into each gap, chaos pours. The object drifts outward, slower and dimmer, sliding toward the limit where even generous exposure times deliver only sky. Stacking techniques extend reach, but stacking also folds assumptions into the data, and assumptions are the quietest route for error to become doctrine. Photometry stages its own rebellion. The light curve that once hinted at a period now splits into rivals. Folding the data by one solution yields a pattern, but a different fold yields an almost equally persuasive rhythm. Small amplitude does not help, as it is easily blurred by thin cirrus, seeing variations and color terms in the comparison stars. If the amplitude truly is small, a nearly spheroidal body might be implicated. If the amplitude is hidden by a tumble, shape could be a shard. Each portrait calls for different physics to explain the drift. Each physics would grow a different tail, if any tail exists. No tail appears. Spectra refuse to choose sides. A handful of instruments catch a red slope friendly to processed organics. A different set, from a night of rare clarity, finds a more neutral tone. Calibrations are cross-checked and found sound. The difference might be real, a surface with mixed patches rotating in and out of favor. It might be the hazard of measuring color at the edge of detectability, where the sky can tint results with the faintest misestimation of extinction. The uncertainty feeds a simple anxiety. Composition is a compass, and the needle wobbles. Geometry teases with promise, and then withholds. A stretch of time arrives when the object sits at a phase angle that traditionally favors tail detection. The field is clean, the point spread function narrow, the background quiet. Deep stacks show nothing beyond a star-like point. Dust, if it flies in grains so large that the sunlight they scatter is stingy. Gas, if it escapes, must leave without escorting a lot of powder. The dynamics still prefer a push of some kind. The invisible hand feels real, yet the chalk outline on the sky refuses to show fingers. Dynamical backtracing, elegant on paper, surrenders to confusion in practice. A cautious integration to the edge of the sun's control produces a heliocentric asymptote that is clean. Transforming into the galactic frame introduces modest, peculiar motion as expected. Attempting to align that vector with an origin among nearby associations yields coincidence without conviction. Star catalogues are rich, but ejection times measured in tens of millions of years smear paths into a cloud where every direction looks possible. The past refuses to focus, and origin remains a map, with most place names rubbed away. Simulation teams crank up synthetic populations to see whether the observed features can emerge from a familiar ocean of debris. Many runs produce lookalikes if the bodies are small, weak, and thermally fidgety. Other runs achieve the same match with extremely porous geometries that respond to sunlight like dandelion fluff. Both families are plausible in broad terms, and both are disquieting for different reasons. Fragile bodies struggle to survive ejection and deep time. Fluffy bodies struggle to keep optical colors that suggest space-weathered organics. The corridor of agreement is real, yet each wall has thorns. Forecasting brightness becomes a separate challenge. Simple squares of distance say the object should fade along a predictable path. Actual measurements betray small deviations that look like personality. Episodes of slightly elevated brightness crop up and then subside. Coincidence with geometry can explain some of it. Aspect angle changes can flatten or amplify the wet shimmer of sunlight on facets. Still, the sense grows that the surface is uneven in thermal behavior, with pockets that either trap the morning or radiate the afternoon with a stubborn delay. Predicting when such pockets rotate into influence is a game played against the clock of waning signal. A quiet administrative reality adds weight. Priorities compete, and there are only so many nights that can be bent around a single faint traveller when other obligations call. Follow-up must share time with targets whose risks loom larger. The small stranger makes a philosophical demand that is hard to satisfy. It asks for attention not because it threatens, but because it enriches. In a practical system tuned for stewardship, enrichment can lose arguments to immediate necessity. Each lost hour dilates the cone of uncertainty further, and with dilation, the mystery acquires a stubborn dignity. Communications teams prepare language with care, even when public statements are not scheduled. Vocabulary must be precise and calm. Words like hyperbolic and interstellar carry currents in the broader culture that can capsize nuance. Within this preparation lives a paradox. The more measured the message, the less oxygen it offers to misunderstanding. Yet the more it can seem evasive to those who hunger for drama. That hunger leaks into the work through channels no one can close. A rumor can pressure decisions without changing the data in any way. The pressure serves as a stress test for process. And the process creaks, but holds. Instrumental effects whisper temptations. A slight update to a star catalogue can shift astrometric baselines by milliarc seconds, enough to tilt delicate inferences. A new flat field correction reduces scatter, but nudges a subset of points in a consistent direction. When the dataset is thick, such effects average out. When it is thin, they can masquerade as physics. Audits proceed with the patience of accountants. Some points are remeasured with revised reductions. Small corrections ripple forward, changing derived parameters by less than a standard deviation. The result is both satisfying and sobering. There is no smoking gun in the tools. There is also no single foundation stone strong enough to erase doubt. A creative hypothesis earns a short season. If the body is not a monolith, but a loose duet of components in slow contact, then mutual shadowing could make outgassing and thermal recoil wax and wane with an odd cadence. A contact binary at these sizes would not be shocking. The light curve offers no firm support, but does not forbid it. The dynamic effect could imitate a variable jet without raising a visible cloud. Models show that such a pair would be vulnerable to spin-induced fission if torqued, but the timescales might be generous compared to the brief embrace with sunlight. The idea joins the shelf of possibilities, neither crowned nor discarded. The prediction horizon finally tucks itself behind the ridge of distance. The object slides toward a part of the sky where faint things take shelter from even the strongest mirrors. The best that remains are ephemerides with broad error bars and promises scrawled in pencil. Recovery later would clarify much, but later is a cliff. In that cliff face, the escalation finds its honest heart. The mystery deepens not because it courts melodrama, but because small truths live at the limit of perception. They arrive thin, they leave early, and they ask questions that linger longer than their light. What remains is a shape in the mind. Not a crisp silhouette, but a charcoal sketch where certain strokes are dark and others smudge. A path that did not close, a velocity that kept a private reserve. A drift that needed a breath of physics too small to parade itself. A surface that wore the colors of long exposure to emptiness. Each piece fits several puzzles. The human wish is for a single lid that clicks onto a single box. The sky, patient and indifferent, keeps handing out pieces from many boxes at once. The deepening comes from learning how to hold them without forcing them to fit. Explanation begins with ice. In the language of comets, sunlight writes pressure through vapor, and vapor writes motion through recoil. A small body warmed above a few tens of Kelvin can vent carbon monoxide, and later carbon dioxide, long before water wakes. If the venting occurs from patches small compared to the surface, the plume can be collimated enough to push without lofting much dust. Such a jet could tilt the trajectory by tiny increments that add up over weeks. The absence of a visible coma would then be a matter of grain size and cohesion. Coarse grains cling, fine grains are scarce. The sky would show a point that moves as if breathed upon, yet refuses to draw a veil. Another version of ice speaks of mantles. Sublimation can build its own armor, as volatiles leave behind crusts of non-volatile residue. The crust hardens under radiation and micro-impacts until only narrow fissures conduct vapor. Each fissure opens and closes with the turning of the sunlit face, and each exhalation is brief. In this picture, momentum transfer is intermittent but coherent enough to register in astrometry. The personality of the path then mirrors the personality of fractured channels. The instrument does not see the crack, but the equation feels it. A rival vision invites light to do the lifting. Radiation pressure never sleeps. It taps on every square meter with a steady hand. A body that is thin or extremely porous presents more area relative to mass, and the tapping becomes a gentle shove. In the limiting case, a sheet-like geometry would surf sunlight with a grace that mimics the push of vapor without needing a molecule to escape. The required area-to-mass ratio implies either extraordinary lightness or significant void within the structure. Fractal aggregates offer one route. Imagine a snowflake of dust glued by frost, a lacework of material that looks like solid shadow under a microscope. Such aggregates can be abundant among the pebbles that form in protoplanetary disks. Ejection could easily fling some into the interstellar medium. Survival then becomes the key. Can a lacework endure millions of years of collisions with micrometeoroids and ultraviolet assault? Models suggest that the outer layers would weather into tougher skins that still preserve low density. A relic of that lineage could drift through with a color shaped by radiation and a mass so small that sunlight speaks loudly to it. Thermal recoil provides a subtler cousin to radiation pressure. As surfaces heat and cool, they emit infrared photons. The departure of those photons carries momentum. If one hemisphere remains warmer, or if roughness creates microcavities where heat lingers, the recoil will favor one direction. This is the Yarkovsky effect, a steady hand that rearranges asteroid families over millions of years. On a tiny traveler spinning quickly, the effect can operate over days if geometry and thermal inertia conspire. A tumble complicates the vectors but does not erase them. In some spin states, the net recoil can track a stable direction for long enough to imitate a whisper of gas. Mechanics of shape invite another path. A contact binary is two lobes joined by a narrow neck. Mutual shadowing and self-heating can create microclimates that switch on with rotation. Small sunlit caverns can trap warmth and then exhale when they turn toward darkness, producing a lagged puff that aligns predictably with the spin. If the lobes are unequal, the rotation can lock into a gentle tumbling that redistributes those puffs in a repeating but non-trivial pattern. From far away, the motion would be smooth, yet the small changes in non-gravitational acceleration would make the orbit solution sway slightly as new data arrive. The light curve may stay shallow if the object is viewed near pole or if albedo differences cancel shape effects. This kind of body would fit naturally inside the catalogue of rubble piles, sculpted by gentle collisions long ago. Composition can color each of these scenarios. Surfaces rich in complex organics can be dark yet mechanically stiff. Such skins are common on bodies that have endured long exposures to cosmic rays. If the skin overlays volatile pockets, thin jets can less easily loft dust, and the plume becomes gas-heavy. If the skin overlays a porous network, thermal recoil can find leverage. Spectral slopes that redden with wavelength are consistent with a varnish of tholins, the tarry residues of radiation chemistry. A neutral slope would favor fresher silicates, or an organized microtexture that reflects light evenly. The available hints do not pick a winner. They set the stage for combinations. Origin feeds speculation with generous fuel. In young planetary systems, giant planets migrate and scatter planetesimals like leaves in wind. Many of these bodies are ejected outright. Some suffer close passages that strip away outer layers and leave weird shapes. A traveler from such an era could carry a surface chemistry sealed by early heating and a core laced with pores from volatile loss. The ejection speed is typically a few kilometers per second. Over millions of years, the velocities of many such fragments blend into the local standard of rest with modest scatter. The result is a soft rain of immigrants that pass through star systems without ceremony. The profiles of those immigrants will vary with the architectures of their birthplaces. Some will be comet cold, some will be asteroid dry, some will be in between, wearing crusts that learned how to breathe through pinholes. A more exotic thought asks whether electrical charging in the interstellar medium could reshape tiny objects over long durations. Dust impacts and plasma interactions can modify surfaces and perhaps charge distributions. For very low mass structures, electrostatic effects might stiffen filigree or help dust veneers adhere. If charging cycles occur with passage through different plasma environments, they could encourage the slow organization of microstructure. This would not grant intention to the traveler. It would grant a kind of weathering that favors lightness and resilience. Engineered origin is a hypothesis that must be handled with compatibility to evidence. A specular sail would display reflectance properties and rotations that do not match most observations. A coated sheet designed to absorb rather than gleam could hide its purpose better, but would still need a reason to be in a natural-looking orbit and a plausible density of similar objects to explain a single detection. Absent compelling anomalies that demand design, the principle of restraint prefers natural mechanisms. Even so, the testing of radiation pressure models borrows techniques developed for sailcraft, and this practical overlap keeps the conversation rigorous rather than theatrical. Microscopic physics supplies still more options. The cohesion of regolith grains can be high at small sizes due to van der Waals forces. A small body can carry a skin that resists shedding even under jet activity. Grains that do escape can quickly re-impact if the escape speed is low and the plume is narrow. This would mask activity from optical searches while still allowing momentum transfer. Thermal cracking adds to the palette. Repeated cycling through temperature gradients can seed new vents and reshape roughness, modulating recoil without gas. The tune then belongs to rock fatigue as much as to ice. Galactic tides and stellar encounters complicate the distant past but can smooth the present. Debris wandering for tens of millions of years will have its spin state randomized by gentle nudges. If the wanderer is small, even subtle torques can push it into chaotic tumbling. Tumbling suppresses long-lived comae by making heating uneven and short-lived. It also amplifies the sensitivity to radiation pressure and thermal recoil, since area and temperature distributions are in constant flux. The resulting motion viewed over weeks will be a slow average of many small pushes. That average can imitate a steady jet with no visible plume. Each theory demands tests that instruments can attempt. Ultra-deep imaging at high phase angles can probe for vanishingly faint dust fans. Spectroscopy in the near-infrared can search for subtle ice bands that optical setups miss. Precision astrometry from space can nail down residuals to levels that discriminate between momentum from photons and momentum from gas. Polarimetry across phase angles can constrain microtexture and porosity. Time-resolved color photometry can look for hue changes with rotation, a clue that surfaces wear mixed coats. None of these tests is easy for a target that fades by the hour. All of them are possible when the next traveler arrives brighter or closer. There is a charm in the idea that the answer is not singular. A small visitor might be both porous and lightly venting. It might be tumbling and still carry a persistent thermal asymmetry. It might wear an organic coat over pockets of more volatile ices. It might have been ejected as a compact shard and then sandblasted into a foam. Real bodies rarely respect tidy categories. They carry chapters of history written by different environments. Theories that sound like rivals often become collaborators when placed on an object that has drifted through many rooms of the galaxy. What the explanations share is a sense that the ordinary can be rich, vapor that leaks through a seam, light that presses with patient fingers, heat that leaves as a soft wind of photons, dust that clings by friendship rather than strength, voids that make a small stone light enough to be moved by sunlight. Together they sketch a family of possibilities that feel natural in a cosmos where time is long and chance is busy. The mystery does not survive by being impossible. It survives by being delicate, perched at the edge of what current eyes can weigh. The toolkit begins with a net of light. Wide-field surveys sweep the sky with cameras bred for endurance rather than glamour. Difference imaging subtracts last night from tonight, so that anything that moved leaves a clean wound on the frame. Synthetic tracking coadds many short exposures, while sliding them at rates that fast movers prefer, pulling faint streaks back into points that software can hold. Non-sidereal guiding keeps the suspected traveler centered while stars smear, a reversal of the usual courtesy. Each technique buys signal without inventing it, the quiet arithmetic of patience turned into pixels. Astrometry gives those pixels a home. Star positions from refined catalogues anchor each measurement with sub-arc-second precision, and careful modeling of optical distortions tames the geometry of the field. Differential corrections iterate on an orbit until residuals settle like birds on a wire. When residuals refuse to settle, the solver invites a non-gravitational term to the party, a set of parameters that stand for pushes nature may be giving. The solution lives not as a single line but as a cloud of almost lines, accompanied by a covariance matrix that explains how confidence stretches in different directions. The cloud is the honest portrait. The line is a polite summary. Photometry turns light into hints of body and skin. Aperture choices avoid stealing flux from crowded backgrounds. Color terms correct for the personalities of filters and detectors. Phase functions map how brightness changes with geometry, and from this map come clues to texture and albedo. When the light curve barely breathes, models learn to whisper. Period search algorithms test thousands of folds, and when none dominate, the result is a boundary rather than a proclamation. Boundaries are valuable. They fence off what cannot be true and leave a yard where reality can play. Spectroscopy carves the light into colors that chemistry understands. Slits are aligned to minimize atmospheric dispersion. Standard stars keep everyone honest. For a target near the threshold of detectability, integration times stretch, and the sky itself becomes a competing voice that must be subtracted with delicacy. A weak slope across the optical band can hint at organics aged by radiation. Lines from gas would be a treasure, yet often the noise sits too high for a signature to stand. Even so, upper limits become tests that models must pass. A plume strong enough to push a path must hide within those limits, or find a different way to speak. Polarimetry asks light about the way it was scattered. Polarization changes with phase angle and carries information about grain size, porosity, and microtexture. Instruments that can measure tiny rotations in the plane of light add a shy dimension to the portrait. Data points fall onto curves that families of small bodies have drawn before. Where the new points sit on those curves, and how fast they climb, can argue for surfaces compacted by time or for coats woven from fine dust. The argument is statistical rather than theatrical, and in that restraint lives its power. Infrared telescopes listen for heat that the optical world cannot hear. Thermal models such as simple near-Earth asteroid templates translate brightness at long wavelengths into size and albedo pairs. If the object is too faint for a solid detection, limits still corral possibility. A very dark surface would glow more at a given size than a bright one. A slow rotator would radiate differently than a fast rotator. Thermal inertia acts like memory, smoothing temperature across dusk and dawn. Each of these factors leaves a small signature that skilled readers can sometimes tease from the murk when geometry is kind. Radar would be a crown, if distance and brightness allow it. A transmitter paints the visitor with radio light and waits for the echo. Delay and Doppler smear the echo into a shape that encodes size, spin, and surface roughness. Speckle tracking can reveal rotation poles. Bistatic setups, where one dish speaks and another listens, extend reach and resilience. Many interstellar travelers keep beyond the radar horizon, but the method remains ready, because a single echo would shrink uncertainties as if time itself had slowed. Occultation prediction offers a different precision. If a star is expected to be eclipsed for a heartbeat by the moving point, a network of small telescopes can line up across the predicted shadow path. Each site records a yes or a no. The pattern of yes and no becomes chords across the body, and from chords comes size and shape sharper than any direct image could manage. The method needs an orbit that is precise to an almost arrogant degree. When the stars align, it turns a faint speck into an object with measurable edges. Orbit determination has grown a spine of modern computation. Bayesian samplers roam the space of possible paths rather than marching straight at a single best fit. Unscented Kalman filters update predictions as new data arrive, handling non-linearity without losing humility. Monte Carlo ensembles spray thousands of trial orbits forward to see how they diverge. The result is not only a prediction, but a measure of how fragile the prediction is. Fragility matters when decisions lean on numbers. Confidence should never be mistaken for certainty. Risk monitoring lives inside its own weather system. Rapid screeners ingest a few positions and estimate whether further follow-up is urgent. Impact monitors take arcs that have matured and scan years into the future for low-probability encounters with Earth. The machinery speaks in likelihoods and keeps a quiet list of objects that deserve polite attention rather than public alarm. Thresholds are codified so that everyone knows when a number crosses a line that triggers escalation. Most candidates never flirt with those lines. A rare one approaches and then steps away as more data arrive. The process protects the public from noise and protects the science from haste. Validation practices keep the tools honest. Pipelines receive injections of synthetic objects with known properties. The software must recover them without being told where to look. Blind drills test whether a team would recognize a real intruder if it behaved like a mischievous cousin rather than like a textbook. Cross-facility comparisons catch biases hiding in the personalities of different instruments. Archival audits revisit reductions with updated catalogs so that milli-arc-second shifts do not masquerade as physics. Every successful audit is a reminder that humility should be automated along with everything else. Space-based eyes change the game by looking where Earth has trouble. Telescopes that stare in thermal infrared see warm stones against cold space even when optical comae are meager. Orbits around the Sun give vantage points less troubled by day-night cycles and weather. Alert streams pour data into brokers that sort by motion, color, and novelty. Machine learning triage rates candidates by how interesting they are, but human review remains the last lock on the door. The combination of speed and care is the style that the sky demands. Data stewardship makes discovery reproducible. Public archives store raw frames, calibration files, and reduction scripts. Time-stamped logs note who measured which point and with what assumptions. Version control on software allows investigators to rebuild a result bit for bit. When a mystery hangs on millimagnitudes or tens of milliarcseconds, provenance is not an academic luxury. It is the difference between confidence and a story that nobody else can tell the same way twice. It is a literal lattice of willing eyes, bound by trust. The combination of speed and care is the style that the sky demands. Testing ideas requires more than observation. It requires disciplined imagination. Modelers build virtual stones and march them through numerically simulated sunlight, vacuum, and heat. They inject plausible porosities and spin states, then ask whether the synthetic sky would trick a survey in the same way. They generate populations and study discovery bias, because the sky we see is not the sky that is. It is the sky filtered by cadence, weather, and human preference. Knowing the filter is how truth gets rescued from habit. Follow-up networks extend the reach of capital equipment with heart and ingenuity. University telescopes hop into action under clear skies when giants are clouded out. Skilled amateurs with precise mounts and good cameras contribute astrometry polished enough to matter. Coordination platforms share ephemerides that move as fits improve. A clear night in a country many time zones away can rescue a fading target from loss. The web is not metaphorical. Communication practices are also tools. Precision language avoids amplifying uncertainty into drama. Pre-planned phrases keep clarity during long nights when new facts arrive inches at a time. Private briefings for partner observatories compress the important into dispatches that can be acted upon. Public notices wait until the math is mature. The quiet interval between the first hint and the first statement is cared for, because silence filled with work is better than sound filled with guess. The community designs a campaign around that prediction and accepts the result even when it disappoints. Disappointment teaches as cleanly as delight. Both carve away what is not true. Instruments improve, and the net tightens. New surveys will sweep deeper and faster. Thermal eyes in space will reduce the tyranny of night and weather. Radar upgrades will push the horizon outward. Astrometry will ride new catalogues that pin the sky with fiercer precision. Each advance is a vote for attention. Not attention as spectacle, but attention as craft. The craft is simple. Ask for light. Measure it without vanity. Let numbers carry the voice of the traveler. The voice is faint, but with the right tools and the habit of testing ideas until they submit to evidence, faint is enough. Two messengers defined the template for foreign stones, one austere and one lavish. The first arrived dim and mute, a point that refused to wear a comet's soft clothing. Its path shouted speed saved from another sun, and its motion whispered a push too gentle for easy blame. Photometry painted a thin, light curve, an outline that encouraged dreams of a long shard or a flattened chip. Spectra revealed little besides a weathered red that suited organics familiar to outer system bodies. The second came bright and bountiful, a classic comet that shed gas and dust like a banner stretched by wind. Its coma and tail were undeniable. Lines of volatile chemistry rose from the data with confidence. Together they offered a binary lesson. Interstellar is not a look. Interstellar is a history. From the quiet visitor came humility about morphology. Shape cannot be trusted from a small amplitude curve and scattered points. A long rod, a flat flake, a compact pebble wearing a skin of low-contrast patches, all could mimic the same light rhythm given the right geometry. The invitation was to keep geometry in the conversation, to treat every portrait as a set of candidates rather than a single face. That habit prevents models from hardening into sculpture before the marble is earned. The bright visitor taught a different humility. Composition was familiar and yet out of balance. The gas mix, richer in certain volatiles than many local comets, argued for a chemistry baked in another nursery with its own temperature profile and radiation diet. This loosened the grip of local intuition. A comet is not a universal recipe. It is a story written by the disk that made it. When such a body crosses the sun's light, it brings its childhood with it. Population was the loudest chorus in both cases. Detection at all suggested a sea thick with debris. The first object was small, and its discovery depended on survey coverage, alert follow-up, and a geometry that gifted enough brightness to cross software thresholds. The second, brighter and active, still needed luck to be seen at the time it was seen. From these facts, analysts built estimates of space density that implied many more passers-by for each one noticed. The sky did not change. The community learned how little of it had been read. Dynamics added an education in bias. The first messenger came from a direction that made detection harder. The second arrived on a path that favored visibility in the hours and seasons when telescopes were most likely to look. A catalogue is not a mirror. It is a filtered memory of the sky. The filters include cadence, weather, moonlight, horizon limits, and human priorities. Both objects taught observers to quantify the filter, not only to find more intruders, but to avoid misreading the few that slip through. Non-gravitational motion, subtle and insistent, lived at the center of the first case. A drift compatible with tiny forces demanded an agent. Gas, light, heat, microgeometry, spin state, all sat at the table. The sum of arguments did not produce a verdict. It produced an ethic. Postpone romance. Weigh parsimony against physics that can actually be measured. If two different small forces could explain the same residuals, build predictions that separate them. A community learned to design nights around the residue of a residue. Both objects taught observers to quantify the filter, not only to find more intruders, but to avoid misreading the few that slip through. The cometary visitor made a case for the practical future. Activity is generous. Gas gives lines, dust gives color. Both give models a scaffold. A mission could meet such a body with instruments ready to sample plasma, dust, and light. Concepts for rapid interceptors grew from that confidence. The lesson was logistical as much as scientific. Fast paths require readiness. An opportunity moves on orbital timescales, not political ones. Surface physics received a sharpening. The quiet object tugged attention toward cohesive regoliths that resist dust escape even when volatile pockets vent. The bright one showed that fine grains can still be liberated with vigor if the pressure gradient is strong. Both together argued that cohesion and grain size distributions deserve a permanent place in models, not as decorations but as drivers of motion detectable across astronomical units. Spin and tumble, once treated as background personality, moved to the front row. Light curves hinted at complex states that change how radiation pressure and thermal recoil accumulate. A stable rotation can amplify or cancel a push. A tumble can smear it into an average that fools a fit into calling it constant. The first visitor forced that conversation by necessity. The second reminded everyone that even a classical coma cannot be fully read without understanding how the nucleus turns. Origin stories matured under these pressures. Ejection due to giant planet migration remained the main engine, but the diversity between the two messengers urged broader thinking. Bodies born in colder zones, with different ice inventories, will age into different temperaments. Systems crowded with giants will throw out rubble with a different spectrum of shapes and spins than systems with calmer architectures. The pair did not draw a map to a specific birthplace. They drew a map of plausible climates across the galaxy's nurseries. In every case, the color of reflected light and the lack of obvious glitter must be consistent with the structure. A dark surface is not a disqualifier. Radiation pressure cares less about albedo than about area and mass. Public imagination touched the work with warmth and static. The first messenger's strangeness attracted stories that outran data. The second, while spectacular, encouraged a return to comfort. Scientists learned to speak with greater care, to translate without flattening, to invite attention without feeding fantasy. The balance is delicate. Curiosity deserves respect, but so does the patience of numbers. The two cases served as rehearsal for a world where interstellar becomes ordinary enough to inspire wonder without confusion. Technical infrastructure absorbed the lessons as code. Pipelines added branches that recognize hyperbolic behavior early and route candidates towards specialized fits. Simulators added interstellar classes to synthetic skies used for training. Archival search tools became more nimble at scouring old frames for recoveries that can stretch arcs. Data brokers added labels for interest flags that mean pursue now rather than later. These changes sound procedural. They are the quiet architecture of a culture that intends to catch the next messenger more cleanly. Instrument design bent toward what the pair made clear. Thermal eyes in space rose in priority, since warmth betrays bodies that hide from optical surveys. Wide fields and rapid cadence became non-negotiable traits for ground systems. Radar aspirations grew bolder, aiming for sensitivity that could paint smaller targets at longer ranges. Occultation networks rehearsed with artificial targets to make sure they could catch a fleeting shadow if the geometry ever granted one. The shape of the toolkit now carries the imprint of two travelers who did not know they were teachers. Perhaps the clearest lesson reached beyond technique. Foreign stones are not rare guests to be marveled at once, a lifetime. They are the slow speech of a galaxy at work, the letters of its long correspondence carried by currents of gravity and time. Each letter is thin. Each letter is incomplete. Many will be unreadable, yet together they say that planetary systems do not end at their snowlines. They leak, they trade, they share their crumbs across voids that only look empty, recognizing that truth changes what it means to guard a world and what it means to listen to the dark. Gravity writes a clean script, yet the trace on the page curves with a softness that betrays a second author. The orbit solver accepts sunlight and mass and distance, then finds a residue that does not fade when best practices are applied. The residue is tiny, a tenderness in the arc, a breath laid against the cheek of motion. It refuses to be chalked up to random error. It asks for a force that does not sit in Kepler's tidy geometry, a companion line in the equation that some nights points sunward, other nights points aside, always whispering rather than shouting. The first suspect is vapor. Sublimation turns ice into jets, and jets turn chemistry into thrust. Momentum leaves with every molecule that escapes. If the surface carries pockets of volatile species that wake at modest temperatures, then a plume can rise without drawing a luminous veil. The mathematics is domestic. Mass flow times exhaust speed gives force. Force divided by mass gives acceleration. A few grams per second through a vent the size of a doorway, at speeds comfortable for gas warmed by sunlight, can yield a push that an orbit solution would feel. The direction comes from geometry. Vents that face the sun exert a recoil that leans away from the light. Vents inside clefts add complexity because walls, shade, and store heat that returns later. The result becomes a pattern in residuals that tracks rotation with a phase lag set by thermal inertia. No glitter on the images is required. Jetting can be tidy to the eye and yet persuasive to the math. The community learned how little of it had been read. The rival suspect is light itself. Photons carry momentum even without mass, and a steady stream of them will press. Radiation pressure scales with the area offered to the sun, while gravity scales with mass. A body unusually light for its size will move slightly closer to the way a leaf moves on a stream of air. The key parameter is the ratio of area to mass. If that ratio is high enough, sunlight can impersonate a breath of gas. No glitter on the images is required. Jetting can be tidy to the eye and yet persuasive to the math. A few grams per second through a vent the size of a doorway, at speeds comfortable for gas warmed by sunlight, can yield a push that an orbit solution would feel. The direction comes from geometry. Vents that face the sun exert a recoil that leans away from the light. Vents inside clefts add complexity because walls, shade, and store heat that returns later. The result becomes a pattern in residuals that tracks rotation with a phase lag set by thermal inertia. The rival suspect is light itself. Photons carry momentum even without mass, and a steady stream of them will press. Radiation pressure scales with the area offered to the sun, while gravity scales with mass. A body unusually light for its size will move slightly closer to the way a leaf moves on a stream of air. The key parameter is the ratio of area to mass. If that ratio is high enough, sunlight can impersonate a breath of gas. Roughness strengthens the effect by harboring pockets where light enters and heat escapes with a favorite direction. A tumble does not erase the force. It smears it into an average that can remain steady until the spin state evolves. For such a scenario to gain traction, evidence must insist on area to mass ratios beyond plausible natural foams, and reflectance behavior must leave fingerprints that a careful observer can trace. Absent those demands, restraint prefers porous rock and breathy vents to deliberate construction. The hypothesis remains a place to test instruments rather than a conclusion to feed stories. The battlefield is not in imagination. It is in signs small enough to vanish under careless calibration. If vapor is the agent, colors may swing by a whisper with rotation as jets bring fresh frost into view. Gas lines may graze detection thresholds during brief intervals when geometry blesses the slit. The non-gravitational parameter should follow a law with distance from the sun that mirrors the awakening and sleeping of a particular volatile. If sunlight is the agent, the acceleration should track radiation pressure's simple scaling and persist in direction with a steadiness that matches a stable area to mass ratio. Thermal recoil adds a seasonal personality. The push should tilt with phase lag relative to the subsolar line. Each agent writes a slightly different heartbeat into residuals. Precision astrometry is the stethoscope. Bayesian comparison gives the argument structure. Competing models receive priors grounded in what is known about small bodies. Vented gas is common in comets. Large area-to-mass ratios are uncommon unless porous structure or special geometry is present. Thermal effects are universal but often weak over short arcs. The data feed likelihoods for each candidate. Evidence accumulates like drops into beakers. Model evidence grows or shrinks with every night of clean positions. When one beaker fills faster, the community leans in that direction without declaring victory until the arc ends or a new instrument slams a hand on the table with a decisive spectrum. Laboratories contribute by shrinking the universe into chambers of vacuum and frost. Ice mixed with organics is warmed under calibrated lamps, while high-speed cameras and microbalances measure the vigor of escaping gas. Dust analogues are compacted into cakes and shattered, then reassembled into foams with porosities that mimic accretion in gentle gravity. Thermal cycles crack and heal microstructures, while emissivity is tracked across wavelengths. These tabletop worlds tell observers what to look for. A certain pore size prefers a certain lag. A certain mixture resists lofting dust even when the gas breathes. A certain roughness amplifies thermal recoil in a way that could masquerade as jetting. The link between chamber and sky is not perfect, but it is often enough to punish bad guesses. Spacecraft remind the debate that non-gravitational forces are household facts in the solar system. Solar sails have flown. Microprobes have felt the hand of light and used it as if it were made of silk. Small asteroids have shown measurable Yarkovsky drifts that move them like seeds on a slow wind. Missions that have tasted coma gas report that venting can be focused and intermittent, and that dust does not always accompany vapor. When the numbers extracted from a faint traveler match ranges familiar from missions that touch stones and ice, confidence rises that the cause is ordinary physics wearing a new coat. Geometry sets traps. When the line of sight keeps the sun, the earth, and the traveler aligned in unfriendly ways, residuals can pretend to be forces that do not exist. Correcting for catalog errors, detector distortion, and atmospheric refraction must be fanatical. A milliarcsecond is a kingdom at these scales. Teams that reduce the same data with different pipelines must see the same whisper of drift, or else admit that the whisper is an artifact promoted by habit. Convergence across personalities of software and choice of reference stars acts like a truth serum. Time pushes the argument through seasons of tone. Early nights can favor gas because the object is warmest, and any volatile near the surface has not yet glazed under radiation. Later nights might favor sunlight and heat recoil as the body cools and deep vents carry the only surviving vapor. A clean transition in residual behavior with distance would be a signature to savor. If no transition appears, and the push remains almost constant in direction and amplitude after correcting for geometry, the case for radiative forces grows. If slight wiggles with a period tied to rotation appear, and if those wiggles align with expected jet modulations, the case for gas takes a step forward. Population arguments lurk behind the physics. If sunlight explains many interstellar drifts, then the galaxy must be rich in objects with large area to mass ratios. That richness implies formation pathways that favor foams and flakes. If vapor explains many drifts, then interstellar bodies carry preserved volatile pockets at a frequency that speaks of cold histories and thick skins. Both conclusions have weight beyond a single traveler. They inform how much crosstalk between systems the galaxy enjoys, and in which forms that talk travels. Ethics of inference matter because a captivating explanation can outrun evidence. Engineered lightness is a seasoned temptress. It invites narrative energy that science cannot repay with narrow data. The correct response is neither dismissal nor embrace. The correct response is to encode tests that would wound the idea if it does not belong. Spectropolarimetric fingerprints for carefully laminated films. Spin-induced flips that sails suffer under torque. Reflections that rise and fall like metallized breath. If these do not appear, the idea returns to the shelf without shame. Clarity often arrives from an angle no one expected. An occultation may cut a clean chord and reveal a size that kills the radiation pressure model without touching gas. A last-minute ultraviolet spectrum may blink with a line that favors a particular volatile. A thermal point from a space-based eye may push the effective albedo into a range that makes one hypothesis starve. Each of these moments turns debate into architecture. Words fade, numbers remain. Whatever the outcome for a given traveler, the deeper change lands in method. Orbit fits now routinely include playgrounds where tiny forces can try their steps. Observing campaigns now write requests that target the signatures of non-gravitational actors rather than only brighter comae. Data archives now host residual time series alongside positions, honoring the faint music that once lived as an afterthought. The community's instruments and instincts have both learned a new ear. The propulsion that is not there is not a ghost. It is physics working at a scale where patience is the only amplifier. Sunlight pushes, heat recoils, ice exhales through veins in stone. Porous bodies listen more acutely to these whispers than dense ones. Tumbles and facets recompose the song from hour to hour. No miracle intrudes. Only accumulation. Only the long arithmetic of small effects compounded over wide space. In that arithmetic is a truth that satisfies without spectacle. The path curves a little differently than gravity alone would demand. The curve is measured. The measure becomes understanding. Understanding becomes readiness for the next faint traveller who carries its own private wind. New eyes prepare in silence. Domes sleep through daylight, while engineers count photons that do not yet exist. On distant plateaus, frames rise that will cradle mirrors wider than rooms. Inside clean rooms, detectors wait behind doors that hiss like careful lungs. The plan is simple in its ambition. Build instruments that see warmer stones, darker stones, faster stones, stones that slip between bright stars as if hiding in their glare. Build cadence that does not blink when weather turns. Build software that notices not only what shines, but what moves. A thermal sentinel gathers in drawings and prototypes. Its orbit will keep it close to the sun from Earth's perspective, where it can stare into regions that ground telescopes avoid. At mid-infrared wavelengths, cold rocks glow like embers, and the glow betrays sizes that optical brightness can disguise. A small dark stone that pretends to be a larger bright one loses the mask when warmth is measured. With such eyes, the sensus tightens and the bias toward reflective skins loosens. The watch becomes equitable, caring as much for the quiet as for the showy. On a Chilean mountaintop, a facility approaches first light with a camera that drinks 10 square degrees at a sip. Its heart is a mosaic of silicon that will map the sky again and again, fast enough to catch motions that used to smudge into background. Nightly sweeps build a memory that deepens with repetition. Moving specks trace parabolas across months. Software learns their habits. The sky becomes a theatre of change rather than a painting. Faint trespassers that would once have crossed between exposures now find their streaks noticed. Their paths asked to return for another bow. Smaller sentries already watch with a patience honed by practice. Networks of modest telescopes scan for flashes and crossings, their rhythm tuned to find travellers that flirt with the atmosphere or sweep through near-Earth space. Their strength is coverage and continuity. Cloud over one volcano does not blind a chain stretched across oceans. Their discoveries feed centralized pages where coordinates call for follow-up. With each season of operation, these systems learn the personality of their own ghosts. Artifacts fade, signals sharpen, confidence grows. Radio giants prepare to speak more softly and hear more keenly. Transmitters will push pulses outward, and dishes will wait for echoes that taste texture and spin. Upgrades reach for greater power and cleaner beams. When geometry allows a distant stone to be painted, delay and Doppler will return a silhouette in time and frequency. Even without a direct hit, speckle patterns can trace rotation poles. The method is a hammer applied delicately. It cracks size and shape out of silence, in ways that no optical trick can match. A different family of instruments watches from space where sky does not end at the horizon. Small spacecraft practice synthetic tracking with appetites for faint movement. They add frames until a whisper of motion stands still on the detector, while the stars slide away. Each added moment pushes signal above noise, and the once invisible becomes a small certainty. A cluster of such craft could work in chorus, turning parallax into distance, and distance into warning. The cost is modest compared to monoliths on mountains. The field of view is narrow compared to giants. Each plays its part, and the ensemble outperforms any soloist. Software grows as important as glass. Data brokers ingest torrents of alerts and learn to thumb through them like a dealer sorting cards. Machine learning models rank the strange without confusing, rare with false. Annotators feed the models examples from human judgment, and the models return fresh candidates that stretch instinct without wasting nights on phantoms. Pipelines record their ancestry. Every detection keeps the name of the code that touched it, the version, the parameters. This genealogy makes trust possible when whispers of acceleration rest on a few pixels. Cadence becomes philosophy. Fast survey strategies catch motion, but depth catches dimness. The plan balances both with a choreography that repeats often in some fields and reaches deeply in others. Seasonal tilts lean into ecliptic lanes where traffic is heavy. Special runs pause for high phase angles that might reveal tails. Roll angles are chosen to keep bright star spikes from trampling candidates. Each choice edits the sky. Each edit is tested with synthetic intruders injected into the stream. If the intruder is not recovered, the cadence changes until it is. Software grows as important as glass. Data brokers ingest torrents of alerts and learn to thumb through them like a dealer sorting cards. Machine learning models rank the strange without confusing, rare with false. Annotators feed the models examples from human judgment, and the models return fresh candidates that stretch instinct without wasting nights on phantoms. Pipelines record their ancestry. Every detection keeps the name of the code that touched it, the version, the parameters. This genealogy makes trust possible when whispers of acceleration rest on a few pixels. Emergent tools promise new kinds of clarity. Occultation networks, once informal, gain discipline and speed. Predictions propagate with maps that invite observers to stand beneath a shadow path that could last 2 heartbeats. If enough stations say yes and no, the outline of a body falls into place with precision that defies distance. Time-tagged GPS stamps turn guesses into edges. Even a negative result tightens the model, because absence has shape when mapped across a continent. Coordination makes the net feel like a single instrument stretched around a world. When one facility tags a need for a follow-up within hours, others rotate schedules. A small telescope under clear air adds points that save an orbit from dissolving. A southern eye catches a passage impossible from north. Private channels carry ephemerides tuned to the minute. Public channels wait until the math can stand on its own. The choreography has a rhythm that feels like breathing. They make interpretation truer. Funding frameworks learn to value continuity. Grants that buy years rather than single seasons allow programs to mature beyond heroic nights into reliable practice. Staffing models reward the patient labor of pipeline maintenance, documentation, and training. The culture shifts gently towards seeing stewardship as part of discovery. A well-kept catalogue is not only a storehouse, it is an instrument that plays when queried. Education weaves into this architecture without fanfare. Students write small segments of code that end up catching real objects. Amateur astronomers with careful mounts join campaigns that confirm faint motions. The boundary between professional and enthusiast blurs in the best way. Many eyes, many hands, one sky. This democratization is not a sentimental flourish. It increases resilience. When time zones, weather, or failures knock down one segment of the net, others lift the slack without waiting for a central command. Simulations become rehearsal rather than entertainment. Synthetic skies flood pipelines. Mock alerts test whether analysts can distinguish a fast hyperbolic approach from a domestic stone. War games of light curves and residuals train the mind to see what matters when a new traveler appears with features that tease. The outcome of such rehearsals is not bravado. It is calm, confidence that the next real night will be handled by habits that know where to look and how to decide. A small but important shift occurs in language. The phrase planet defense widens its meaning. It comes to include curiosity as a form of protection. Knowing what passes nearby, where it came from, what it is made of, becomes part of guarding a world. Surprise is an adversary not only when a rock threatens, but when a rock carries knowledge that could have been gathered and was not. Instruments are tuned for both dangers. They watch for trajectories that cross the future with malice, and for trajectories that cross with poetry. Future missions sketch bold lines. Concepts for interceptors sit on shelves waiting for the trigger that moves them into hardware. Small spacecraft launched on short notice could meet a bright traveler well before it departs. Kits of instruments, scaled for speed and mass limits, could taste dust, sniff gas, map spin, and nudge close enough for images that turn riddles into edges and shadows. Such missions demand readiness, spare rockets, rooms cleared for rapid assembly, international agreements that allow quick tracking support. The infrastructure built for warning can be repurposed for encounter, and encounter will turn speculation into geology. As the net sharpens, the sky responds with its same calm. There will still be nights when clouds growl and plans falter. There will still be objects that slip through, unremarked, too small, too fast, too unlucky to be caught. Yet the fraction that are seen will rise. The ones that are seen will be measured with an honesty that allows subtle forces to be felt and not mistaken. The maps will include paths that come from beyond the sun, with the same respect given to paths that belong to domestic comets. The outcome is not a promise of control, it is a promise of attention. Instruments will continue to catch whispers and turn them into numbers. Numbers will continue to become stories of stone, ice, light, and time. Story will continue to instruct design. Design will continue to sharpen instruments. The cycle is simple, sober, and generous. It honors the travelers by listening well, and it honors the planet by refusing to be surprised when surprise is avoidable. Prediction becomes a rehearsal staged 1,000,000 times in silence. Computers spin dice that never stop, each throw a slightly different sky. Positions wobble within their measured errors. Velocities shift by whispers. Non-gravitational terms wander inside plausible bounds. From these tiny perturbations, futures bloom. Some futures curve past the planet with generous margins. A few graze within the moon's distance. A rare fraction thread, narrow passages where gravity thickens and deflection options thin. Every branch is recorded. Every closeness is counted. The mountain of outcomes forms a weather map for years that have not arrived. The language of risk is careful. Probabilities are not promises. They are harmonies emerging from many trials. Analysts assign weights to paths based on how much the data allows them to breathe. A cloud of trajectories is compared against the Earth's position through time. The result is not a single date circled in red. It is a spectrum of likelihood that rises and falls like surf. Most of the surf is gentle. Some waves arrive taller than comfort. Rare crests look like walls. The aim is not to frighten. The aim is to know how often walls appear if the cosmos is allowed to keep its habits. Keyholes live inside these rehearsals like fable doors. A keyhole is a tiny region in space where a passing object receives just the right tug to return on a future date with impact geometry sharpened by fate. If a synthetic path slips through a keyhole, a later traversal of the orbit will align stone and planet unkindly. The width of these doors is often only hundreds of meters. Uncertainty can smear an entire corridor across a slice of space wider than continents, yet the keyhole sits within it like a needle's eye. The Monte Carlo method is the perfect tailor here. It drapes many future cloths across the same form and measures how often a seam falls on the needle. Physical consequences are folded into the dice. Size is sampled from brightness using albedo distributions compiled from prior surveys. Composition classes apply densities and strength parameters. Entry angles and speeds combine with atmospheric models to decide whether the visitor will airburst or reach the ground. The spectrum of outcomes paints impact energy in terms that emergency planners can read. Kilotons convert science into language that policy understands. Ground damage footprints are derived from shockwave models and thermal emission estimates. Coastal entries are mapped to tsunami potentials using bathymetry databases that know the shape of continental shelves. No number is treated as a verdict. Each is a tile in a mosaic of possibility. Scales offer shorthand for the flood of data. One index uses color and integer steps to describe the public significance of a potential impact within the next century. Another uses logarithmic odds to compare risk to a background rate of impacts. Analysts calculate both with humility. Even a non-zero line on a chart can cause confusion if presented without context. Updates are issued as new observations carve uncertainty down. The process is rhythmic. Early probabilities often rise and fall as nights of data push and pull an orbit. Many candidates flirt with attention and then relax into insignificance. A few maintain a steady line upward until another facility locks them down and the line collapses to almost zero. Very rarely, a line refuses to collapse. Preparation then moves from planning to action. Unfriendly scenarios are practiced in synthetic time. Analysts imagine a discovery late in a track, with little warning before a close pass. They ask whether tracking assets can spin into position fast enough to cut uncertainties. They imagine a path that threatens a sparsely observed ocean corridor. They test whether networks of small telescopes can fill the gap overnight. They simulate a week of clouds across key facilities to see if redundancy is real or theoretical. Stress builds not because catastrophe is imminent, but because the capacity to handle bad news must exist before bad news arrives. Every fragility discovered by rehearsal is a gift. Non-gravitational mischief is folded into the games. Drifts from heat recoil change where keyholes sit. Outgassing changes whether a faint stone will brighten into a comet in time for detection. Porosity changes how an airburst distributes energy across altitude. Analysts allow these behaviors to vary across populations and watch how sensitivity curves change. If impact odds spasm wildly when a small parameter is nudged, that parameter earns investment. Laboratory campaigns then work to measure it. Spacecraft missions then carry instruments to pin it down on real stones. The feedback loop is practical. Better priors shrink the fog in future rehearsals. Interstellar interlopers receive their own trials. Their speeds at infinity are higher. Warning times are shorter. Radar may never catch up. Optical detection windows are narrow and often compromised by solar elongation. Monte Carlo runs for such visitors explore the marginal edges of response. Could ground networks get enough astrometry to rule out threat within days? Could a thermal space telescope catch a fading ember in time to constrain size? The conclusion is often sobering. Some classes of far strangers will leave only whispers. The rehearsal does not end in despair. It informs cadence choices that bias toward early warning, even when odds are slim. Mitigation enters as a companion rehearsal. Given a hypothetical object with a measurable chance of impact decades out, what changes when a small spacecraft nudge is applied at different times? How small a push can shift a keyhole miss to a clean pass given the lead time? The Monte Carlo frame evaluates not only whether deflection works, but how sensitive it is to errors in mass, spin, and structure. A poorly timed intervention can move danger from one city to another. The ethics for such possibilities are explored with the same care as the physics, because no calculation lives in a vacuum at this scale. Decision theory keeps the rehearsal honest. Every choice is measured not only by expected value, but by regret. Observing time spent chasing a phantom is cheap if the phantom could have been a city killer. Conversely, chasing every rumor is wasteful if it starves other projects. Analysts define thresholds for attention, for escalation, for notification. These are not secret corners. They are documented to prevent personality from overriding policy during strained nights. The ethics for such possibilities are explored with the same care as the physics, because no calculation lives in a vacuum at this scale. Transparency within the system reduces the chance that enthusiasm or fear will pull resources in the wrong direction. The goal is not to police curiosity. The goal is to keep trust intact by moving facts faster than speculation. Edge cases are invited to misbehave. Analysts throw stones at shallow entry that skip like pebbles on a pond and re-enter far downrange after a long arc. They try paths that graze the atmosphere and shear off fragments that spread into multiple footprints. They test impactors that approach from solar elongations where surveys are blind. They test times where an impact lands near crisis seasons for unrelated reasons, when emergency services are already stretched. The resilience of systems is mapped not on perfect days but on poor ones. Only then does confidence mean something. Outliers deserve a special corner in the rehearsal hall. Events with negligible prior probability are still explored if the cost of being wrong is existential. On a long timeline, black swans sometimes swim. Analysts produce dashboards where bizarre but possible combinations of parameters are tracked. The elegance lies in refusing to weight them heavily while refusing to ignore them. Insurance works that way. The sky demands similar respect. Preparing for extremes does not invite them. It reduces the price of surprise. The final product of this labor is not a dramatic list. It is a sequence of small instructions written into software and schedules. If an object arrives with these characteristics, trigger this instrument. If astrometric residuals behave that way, escalate within this many hours. If a keyhole crosses this altitude range, notify these agencies. If conflicting fits arise, assign these teams to reconcile them by this method. Most nights, none of these branches executes. Some nights, a few do, rare nights. The system dances through the tree like lightning running down a conductor, and the dry drill becomes wet response. Stress testing the sky does not make the universe kinder, it makes attention stronger. By building 1,000 possible tomorrows and walking them, the watchers reduce the territory where panic lives. What remains is a steady habit of watching, measuring, and deciding with clarity, even when the numbers are small and the stakes feel large. The rehearsal hall stays open. The dice keep rolling. The planet sleeps beneath a lattice of probabilities, most soft, a few sharp, all understood better each season. Risk, no longer a shadow, becomes a map. The map does not promise safety. It promises fewer surprises. A quiet room holds the script that no one wants to read aloud. Phones sleep on felt pads. Wall clocks avoid ticking. Screens glow at a level chosen to remember night. Inside this softness lives a playbook that starts with a number and ends with voices across continents. The number is a probability written with care, framed by a date and a corridor of uncertainty. When it passes a threshold set by long meetings and older lessons, the first call is made. The first call goes sideways rather than upward. It crosses to the partner who keeps the catalogues honest, the keeper of positions and provisional names. Confirmation is not ceremony. It is a checklist. Timestamps are inspected. Bias frames are examined for scars. Residuals are recomputed by another hand on another keyboard. If two independent reductions sing the same small melody, the door to the next room opens. If they disagree, the process loops until the melody agrees with itself. The second call bridges to the watchers who control time on instruments. Follow-up must be scheduled inside hours, or the error cloud will bloom into a weather system no one can steer. A coordinator speaks the ephemeris in absolute terms, not in flourishes. Right ascension, declination, proper motion, magnitude, rate of change. The recipient repeats the coordinates back, a ritual designed to catch the single digit that could sink a night. A record marks who accepted the task and how much sky will be covered. The third call reaches into an office deep inside the machinery of stewardship. It is staffed by people who translate mathematics into actions with consequences. They do not start sirens, they open folders. Protocol asks for a layered notification. The first layer remains inside a small circle. Centers that monitor impact odds receive a summary written for insiders. Phrases are clipped, verbs chosen for their calm. Impact probability at current arc length sits within a band that merits attention. Keyholes of specific size are present or not. Non-gravitational terms are or are not in play. No adjectives are allowed. Past a second threshold, a narrow group of external partners is tapped. Weather and disaster agencies are briefed in private, not because danger has matured, but because their calendars need warning as much as telescopes do. They are told that a rehearsal may become a response. Satellite operators listen too. For close passes that thread between constellations, air and maritime authorities are alerted to possible sky events if an airburst could occur over trackless water. Language here is disciplined. Words are chosen that respect uncertainty, while preparing logistics for a night that may never come. A draft for public notice is written even when no public notice will be sent. The habit inoculates against panic. The draft speaks in exact ranges. It outlines the plan for additional observations. It includes estimates of when probabilities will be refined enough to matter. It avoids metaphor. It uses a single scale for risk and defines it in plain speech. It is written to fit in a window of attention that most people can give at a glance. It is rewritten until the smallest phrase cannot be misread. Behind one door sits a list of escalation triggers. If a probability crosses this line, notify these agencies. If a trajectory intersects this altitude over water, coordinate with these maritime centers. If the time to possible impact falls below this many days, activate this tracking stack. and reserve this slice of telescope nights. Each trigger reflects the lessons of prior drills. None are left to whim. Emotional weather is removed from the equation by making the equation itself humane. There are doors that open only if the map takes a darker turn. If a non-trivial chance of impact appears within weeks, a different orchestra assembles. Emergency planners ask for footprints of energy on the ground. Hospitals are counted within rings of expected shock. Power lines and pipelines are traced across base maps. The list of languages needed for advisories is compiled. Press offices prepare two kinds of statements, one that announces continued monitoring, another that announces an event with practical guidance. The critical choice is tinder. An announcement must avoid sparks, while still lighting the way to reasoned response. Every call chain includes a branch for uncertainty that grows after attention is announced. The world does not pause for clean data. Weather can smother instruments. The object can be smaller than assumed. It can split. It can go silent. The public must be told when uncertainty grows as honestly as when it shrinks. Silence is not a strategy. Silence breeds rumors that grow teeth. The protocol recognizes this by scheduling updates at set times regardless of whether the news is dramatic. The cadence becomes a heartbeat that the public can learn to trust. International colleagues are invited early. A planet is both a globe and a neighborhood. Space agencies trade updates in a language that is technical and warm at once. Observatories swap time. Radar assets are lined up across different longitudes so that sunlight and geography do not limit reach. In one time zone, a team sleeps so that another can remain awake without haze. Ownership disappears under the weight of purpose. The document that tracks contributions reads like a line of names rather than like hierarchy. There is a discipline for keeping secrets brief. Scientific embargoes are normal for discoveries that grow over months. Planetary stewardship operates on a different clock. When probabilities climb, private channels can hold the conversation only long enough to prevent confusion while follow-up is gathered. The threshold for public notice is set lower than the threshold for glamour. The guiding principle is simple. People cannot prepare for what they do not know. At the same time, they should never be asked to carry anxieties that data cannot justify. Walking that line is part of the craft. Ethical review sits at the edge of the quiet room. It is not a tribunal. It is a reminder. Numbers represent futures that include homes and rivers and names. If an intervention ever becomes likely, the consequences of a push that changes a footprint must be narrated before it is authorized. Diplomatic channels would deserve a seat at the table. Liability would cease to be abstract. Deflection is not a technical act alone. Given lead time and careful targeting, the physics is clean. The social consequences are not. Protocols write words for these moments in advance because improvisation is unkind when stakes are high. Training gives the script its muscles. Staff rotate through drills where simulated alerts arrive at inopportune times. Messaging is composed under fatigue and then evaluated in cold light. The calls are placed to people who expect them and to people who do not, so that reflex and redundancy grow together. Missteps are documented with a generous pen. An apology written before an error prevents the kind of defensiveness that slows response. Reporting paths are tried from distant sites with poor connectivity, because clear nights often live far from strong networks. Technology keeps the calls from collapsing under their own weight. Secure channels are maintained in duplicate. Encryption is not allowed to introduce delay. Backup numbers are taped inside physical notebooks, in case servers go blind. Templates for advisories live on desks as paper, not just as files inside systems with many dependencies. The small indignities of cutting and pasting across incompatible formats are removed in peacetime so they do not steal minutes in storm time. Anxiety can be cut by removing friction, and friction is a design problem. Public engagement is part of the backbone, not a theatre. Communicators meet citizens with respect for curiosity. They publish explainers that can be read without prerequisites. They offer raw numbers on dashboards, along with gentle interpretations. They publish the dates of the next updates. They answer questions in plain language. They say, "I do not know when that is the truth," and they explain what will be done to find out. In the absence of drama, they share the craft itself, so that attention becomes appreciation rather than suspicion. Closure is designed along with opening. If a case resolves into safety, a final message is sent that says so with the same visibility as the first notice. Credit is shared widely. Data and reductions are archived, where anyone can reconstruct the path taken by the numbers. Lessons learned are written in a public ledger. The culture refuses to treat a non-event as an embarrassment. It treats it as proof that vigilance worked. Relief is acknowledged without triumph. Then the notebooks are closed and returned to the shelf, where they wait for the next quiet morning when a number rises and a soft phone begins to hum. Inside the quiet room, the playbook stays simple in spirit. Tell the right people soon. Ask for more light. Share what is known in words that steady hands can carry. Act on thresholds, not on moods. Prepare for surprises with drills instead of prayers. Keep the public inside the circle without crowding them with speculation. Let the measured sky prove its generosity again and again. The watchers practice this like a catechism until it becomes a posture that does not need to be recalled. Posture is what remains when the plan is gone and attention is all that is left. The idea of moving a stone begins with a collision that is not an accident. A spacecraft is built to be a fist of metal and intent. It closes the distance over months, sometimes years, and at the end there is a flash of kinetic truth. Momentum passes from aluminum to regolith. The target shifts by a breath. A small change in speed multiplies into a large change in position when multiplied by time. Guidance and navigation are the art. Impact geometry is the science. The aftermath is advocacy written in dust, a clean signal that nudges can work when the numbers are forgiving. Inside the quiet room, the playbook stays simple in spirit. Tell the right people soon. Ask for more light. Share what is known in words that steady hands can carry. Act on thresholds, not on moods. Prepare for surprises with drills instead of prayers. Keep the public inside the circle without crowding them with speculation. Let the measured sky prove its generosity again and again. The watchers practice this like a catechism until it becomes a posture that does not need to be recalled. Posture is what remains when the plan is gone and attention is all that is left. Yet even a clean success contains humility. The transferred impulse depends on structure. A cohesive boulder soaks the blow in one way. A rubble pile, held together by gravity and friction, coughs up debris that can amplify the push or waste it. Surface strength writes itself into the beta factor that engineers whisper about in control rooms, the multiplier that expresses whether a plume of ejector carried extra momentum away. One target yields beta above unity. Years of lead are needed for a shift that would look like a rounding error if measured in a single orbit. Maintenance of the tug requires reliability that is almost moral in its demand. The reward is a change whose precision can be shepherded like a hand on a shoulder. There are hybrid dreams that paint force across a surface without touching. Ion beams can be aimed from a hovering companion to sputter atoms from a hemisphere. Each atom that departs carries momentum. The sum writes a push that can be kept constant as long as propellant remains. This method inherits the gentleness of a tractor and the directness of an impact without inheriting their worst weaknesses. It still has appetites. Power systems must be bold. Lifetime must be long. The target must tolerate the slow shaving of its skin. For some objects, that shaving will be a kindness. For others, it will be a risk if the surface is too loose. Lasers live in the same family of persuasion. A spot on the surface is heated until material vaporizes. The departing vapor becomes a rocket that burns the rock itself. Adaptive optics and phased arrays are invoked in quiet papers. Beam quality must be serene to paint a spot from far away. Atmosphere distorts if the emitter sits on Earth. Orbiting lasers avoid that ocean of air, but require fleets that can be trusted to aim with care across years. The physics is persuasive. The politics and power budgets are stern. Still, the thought remains as a promise to an era that invests as much in patience as it does in thrust. Mass drivers take a more architectural path. Anchored machinery lands and begins to lift and throw. Pebbles become reaction mass. Each launch is a tiny rocket that leaves the asteroid and gives it a nudge. The cumulative effect climbs like a staircase. This method dreams of worlds where equipment can be delivered and operated for seasons. It prefers targets with gentle gravity and enough cohesion that excavation does not merely collapse into a cave-in. It also offers a side benefit that is almost lyrical. The same machinery that protects can someday harvest, turning defense into industry without changing its soul. At the far end of the toolbox sits a word that gathers heat, a device that releases energy as light and plasma can be detonated near a threatening body. The pulse scours one face, vaporizes a skin, and the recoil launches the mass along a safer path. Standoff distances keep the stone intact. Surface coatings change the coupling. The yields can be chosen to avoid shattering if chosen early in time. This route holds the best ratio of push to mass delivered. It also carries the dragon of debris into the room. Treaty concerns rise like cliffs. Authority becomes as important as aim. The method is not banned from thought. It is constrained by the weight of history and by the demand that any use be morally and politically defensible. All methods kneel before time. A millimeter per second applied 10 years before a potential keyhole pass is a rescue. 10 millimeters per second applied 10 months before a pass is a gamble. 10 meters per second applied 10 days before a pass is theatre. Calendars rule. Discovery latency becomes the most practical form of propulsion. Early sight means gentle correction. Late sight means hard choices or resignation. This arithmetic explains why telescopes share budgets with propulsion systems in the same conversation. Eyes buy time. Time buys gentleness. Target personality complicates every plan. A binary system spins about a center that lies in emptiness. A kinetic strike on one lobe may torque the pair into an unfriendly tumble. A tractor, hovering near a binary, must dance with two partners. A cohesive monolith offers a clear surface for a laser spot. A sandcastle offers only a cloud. Porosity absorbs shocks but also amplifies certain ejector plumes when grains act as a community. Spin states wander under sunlight. Yorp can shift rotation during a long campaign, turning a favorable orientation into a nuisance. Deflection dreams must include sensors that read these moods and controllers that adapt without flinching. Navigation under reality is its own challenge. A spacecraft closing at kilometers per second must judge a target measured in dozens or hundreds of meters. Star trackers and LiDAR must separate a mottled rock from the stars, while avoiding saturation from sunlit facets. Autonomous guidance must be trusted to choose a final aim point when light time turns commanding from Earth into a memory. For tractors and shepherds, the obstacle is monotony rather than speed. Thrusters must sip propellant without coughing. Tanks must refuse to leak. Orientation must hold during long shadows and long pranks played by the Sunday. Fragmentation risk sits like a warning in any plan that touches violent methods. A blow that shatters a weak body can spread risk across a footprint wider than the original. Airbursts from a swarm of fragments may be preferable if energies are small. They may be worse if energies are large. Models help, but they are only models. When the decision time arrives, the choice rests on imperfect knowledge and on an appetite for ambiguity set by leaders who answer to citizens. That is why options are rehearsed on benign targets. Practice writes muscle where fear would otherwise write hesitation. Multi-mission architectures appear when single strokes reveal their limits. One craft scouts and characterizes. It measures mass with a hover. It takes images sharp enough to pick safe zones and dangerous ones. It departs or waits. A second craft arrives as a striker, tuned by the first into a precision instrument. A third arrives as a shepherd to trim the result into perfection. The sequence sounds luxurious until the cost of failure is spelled out in cities. In that ledger, redundancy is not extravagance, it is wisdom. Legal and diplomatic frameworks grow beside hardware. Jurisdiction over a rock that is no one's property, but everyone's concern must be made simple. If a deflection changes a predicted impact point from one coast to another, consent must precede action. Insurance cannot cover these choices, yet the spirit of insurance must. Risk is shared unevenly by geography. Authority to act must be paired with responsibility to consult. Protocols are drafted to be read by people who are not engineers. They are meant to travel across languages and cultures without losing clarity or courtesy. Testing in peacetime strengthens confidence. Small controlled impacts on well-known targets produce data that calibrate models. Gentle tractors hover near stones with no threat attached. Lasers fire at inert panels in orbit to refine phasing. Ion beam shepherds practice on cooperative CubeSats. Every rehearsal writes realism into promises. Promises without rehearsal are stories. The difference is everything when a calendar gathers urgency. Resources sit at the root of limits. Power defines what can be pushed at a distance. Propellant defines what can be delivered. Launch availability defines whether a plan can leave the ground in time. Communication networks define whether controllers can see what they must. Budget defines all of these without caring about poetry. The defense of a world competes with other needs. The argument made on its behalf must be sober. The protective system is not a monument. It is plumbing, intended to be invisible until needed, then obvious and dependable. There is a quieter limit that hides in psychology. Success can breed complacency. A coordinated deflection that turns a potential harm into nothing will not leave a crater to point at. The absence of disaster is a hard story to keep funded. Institutional memory must be protected so that decades do not soften resolve. The solution is to fold protection into routine science, to let telescopes that measure beauty also count threats, to let missions that explore pay a tax of engineering lessons for steering. When practices share purpose, memory survives. In the end, deflection is a conversation, not a shout. Gravity answers softly when courted early. Kinetic blows answer cleanly when aimed with care. Beams answer by erasing atoms one by one. Engines answer by throwing pebbles back the way they came. All of them share a grammar. Start before the calendar steals dignity. Know the target as an individual, not as a cartoon. Use as little force as needed for as long as you can. Invite many hands to hold the lever. Accept that every plan will change after first contact with reality. The limits do not accuse ambition, they refine it. They remind a species that mastery of trajectories is not mastery of fate. The planet circles a star that will never notice the care taken on its third stone. That indifference is a kind of freedom. It allows the watchers to build their tools without asking permission. It invites them to plan corrections not in fear, but in regard. If a day arrives when a small push is needed, the gesture can be made with calm. The sky does not bargain, but it yields to timing, and timing is a skill that can be taught. Foreknowledge sits like a lantern in a crowded room. Its light is good, but eyes need time to adjust. A number on a screen can be a candle or a siren, depending on who holds it and how it is shown. Those who watch the sky carry the first glow. They read the fractions that describe a chance and the margins that hold error. They must decide when to share and how. The moral weight rests not in the digits but in the moment chosen to let them breathe in public air. Transparency wears several faces. One face is raw disclosure, a dashboard where probabilities rise and fall in full view. Another face is shaped language, updates in steps tuned to protect against confusion. Between them lies a spectrum of choices, each with a cost. Reveal too early, and a neighborhood endures weeks of anxiety for a risk that may vanish with one more night of data. Reveal too late, and trust fractures when people learn that knowledge was kept from them while clocks ran. The ethic that guides this balance is simple to say and hard to live. Respect agency. Give citizens what they need to decide for themselves, but give it in a form that does not ask them to become specialists overnight. Panic is the shadow that transparency casts. It does not always appear, and when it does, it has a particular shape. People do not fear numbers, they fear silence and speculation. Where information is slow or ambiguous, rumor writes the missing sentences. An ethical response treats panic not as a failing but as a signal that communication failed to match tempo with curiosity. Calm arrives when cadence is predictable. Updates come at known times. Terminology stays consistent. Scales are explained in plain words. Uncertainty is acknowledged without apology. The public learns the rhythm and holds their breath for the next measure rather than shouting between notes. The moral pressure increases when choices may shift risk from one horizon to another. A nudge applied to a small body can move a footprint hundreds of kilometers if the event belongs to the worst branch of a forecast. Consent becomes more than a legal word. It becomes a map of obligation. Communities along a corridor deserve a seat at the table where options are weighed. The presence of doubt does not excuse bypassing those lives. Even if physics insists that the best path is clear, the voices of those who would inherit a residual risk deserve to be heard early, not as a courtesy, but as a form of accuracy. Inequity haunts foreknowledge. Data flows along cables that follow wealth. Telescopes rise where budgets allow. Alerts arrive in languages taught by power. If a probability touches coasts where resources are thin, the burden of preparation can fall on those least able to carry it. An ethical framework corrects for this by design. Translation budgets are part of the watch. Training for local responders is not an afterthought. Partnerships with regional observatories are established before any crisis so that local eyes can verify and local voices can advise. Foreknowledge that does not travel evenly is a kind of blindness wearing a crown. Secrecy asks for a narrow, carefully fenced garden. Some details must be protected while instruments are tasked, or when assets could be overwhelmed by attention. The garden must have short walls and many gates. The length of stay inside is measured in hours and days, not months. Every hour inside the garden accrues debt that must be repaid with clarity. If secrecy lingers beyond necessity, suspicion blooms. Suspicion corrodes not only the particular event, but the fabric the next event will need. Ethical watchers do not hoard. They stage the release of truth, as if truth were perishable. False alarms are inevitable in a system that respects faint signals. The ethical challenge is to preserve patience through these alarms without numbing attention. The answer is not to chase more slowly. It is to honor the unromantic craft of explaining why many alarms are the cost of catching the few that matter. When a case resolves into safety, the closure should be as visible as the opening. Relief deserves a headline. Gratitude for the labor that produced a non-event deserves a paragraph. In this way, the public learns to read outcomes like tides, not like accidents. Privacy enters on an unusual path. Planetary risk is communal by nature, yet personal lives are woven through the response. Evacuation planning may expose vulnerabilities. Health systems may report their capacities. Insurance markets may twitch. The ethical watch avoids exploiting these revelations. It asks only what is needed to prepare, and allows institutions to disclose at the scale that serves the public without inviting predation. The watchers do not trade in detail that would worsen inequity. They trade in maps and timing and practical instruction. Responsibility to future generations lives in the way records are kept. Foreknowledge that is not archived with context becomes folk memory and then vapor. Ethical stewardship stores raw frames, reductions, and decision logs in places that will outlast grants. It documents hesitations along with decisions. It allows those who come later to see how caution was learned and where confidence was earned. The children of those who watch the sky should be able to read the journals and understand the posture that kept their towns quiet. Language is a tool that can wound or heal. Words like catastrophic and unprecedented bend attention in ways that science cannot always justify. Alternatives exist. Plain references to energy, altitude of airburst, radius of broken glass, hours of notice, and simple instructions for safety have more power and less heat. The ethical habit is to mistrust adjective and to trust number. Where metaphor is used, it is used for care rather than spectacle. A metaphor that calms without minimizing is a good companion. A metaphor that thrills without informing is a siren that should be set aside. Misinformation blooms where fear finds a garden. The response is not dismissal, it is conversation. Monitors track claims that spread quickly and answer them in public spaces with patience and receipts. The aim is not to punish creativity but to keep space for action. In moments where decisions must be made within days, attention cannot be squandered arguing with phantoms. The ethical posture is to provide sources, to correct gently, and to avoid turning correction into theatre. Trust grows when correction is a service rather than a contest. Stewardship asks for humility about limits. Some visitors will be missed. Some uncertainties will refuse to shrink. Some decisions will be made under fog. The ethical answer is not to pretend that omniscience is near. It is to make uncertainty visible without letting it paralyze. Contingency planning is written in pencil and updated when margins move. Communities rehearse not with fear, but with a steady sense that the sky is one of many neighbors, most quiet, a few temperamental, none malicious. Children can be taught to see meteor streaks with wonder, while also knowing how to move away from windows if told. Preparedness and awe can share a room. Knowledge has a price in attention. Telescopes need funding to keep cameras cold. Analysts need time to write code that is boring and precise. Communicators need salaries to craft sentences that do not harm. Ethics becomes budget when choices are made among needs. The argument that wins is not drama. It is stewardship as infrastructure. The watch is a public good, like clean water, invisible when working, essential when needed. Quiet virtues rarely headline, yet they define safety over decades. Building a culture that honors them is an ethical project that reaches beyond astronomy. There is a spiritual dimension that science does not own but must acknowledge. Foreknowledge touches fate. People will ask whether stones that cross the sun's light carry meaning beyond mechanics. Ethical communication does not mock that impulse. It offers room for private interpretation while keeping public action anchored to evidence. It allows ritual and reflection to unfold without letting them steer the wheel. In this, dignity is preserved without compromising the craft. Finally, there is the simple act of standing watch without bitterness. The list of near misses and harmless passes will grow long. The reward is not applause, it is uneventful mornings. The ethical spine is built from accepting that prevention leaves no crater to circle, no monument to point at, no holiday to mark. It leaves a living world. Those who tend foreknowledge do their work with a modest pride that does not require an audience. They are content to be named in small type, if naming is needed at all. Foreknowledge does not make a species prophetic, it makes a species attentive. Numbers on a screen become a promise to tell the truth early, to tell it clearly, and to share the burden of choice. Panic is addressed with cadence, inequity with design, secrecy with clocks that run fast, and power with consent. The lantern's light spreads, and eyes adjust. In that glow, the planet sits exactly where it has always sat, circling a quiet star, watched by minds that have learned to carry both caution and tenderness without losing either. Night folds its scaffolding, and the machines keep their low voices. Monitors show only dots that move a little, then a little more. Inside those motions rests a ledger that few will see in full. It contains names that will never reach a headline, coordinates that will never be repeated at a dinner table, and probabilities that never quite become events. It is not a list of doom. It is a garden journal for a planet that learned to notice the weather of stone. Foreknowledge does not make a species prophetic. It makes a species attentive. Numbers on a screen become a promise to tell the truth early, to tell it clearly, and to share the burden of choice. Panic is addressed with cadence, inequity with design, secrecy with clocks that run fast, and power with consent. The lantern's light spreads, and eyes adjust. What began as rumor becomes a practice of attention. A faint visitor is neither a prophecy nor a threat. It is a reminder that the interstellar medium is not empty, and that villages of ice and stone long dissolved now write letters by debris. Those letters arrive without salutation. The readers write replies in the form of instruments tuned to care. The reply is patient. It says, "We saw you pass." It says, "We measured, we learned, we told one another in time to act, if acting were needed." The ledger is quiet by nature. It behaves like a tide chart written for currents of rock. A line notes a candidate with a speed that does not wear the sun's ring. Another line notes a fragment with a brightness that will fade before a second look. A handful of entries sit under pale flags that mean continue to watch. On rare days, a color deepens and calls for more eyes. Most days the colors remain gentle. This softness is the miracle. It means the world continues beneath skies that do not break. The act of looking grew into a culture. Schedulers trade the luxury of sleep for the luxury of certainty. Engineers argue with noise until it yields another decimal place. Analysts drink the cold clarity of residuals and let imagination sit in a separate room until numbers invite it inside. Communicators choose verbs like caretakers choose herbs, for freshness and for honesty. Under these habits, the planet acquires a new posture. It does not crouch, it stands, it keeps its eyes open. The sky offers no gratitude, it offers chances. Each chance takes the shape of a geometry that may never return. A window opens for hours, a cloud passes, a rotor warms, a lock lifts. A minute saved here means a corridor of uncertainty shrinks there. The measure of success is not applause, it is a graph that falls towards safety with no one noticing. That is why the ledger stays hushed. It would be impolite to shout about mornings that remain ordinary. Unseen work writes dignity into the watch. Someone calibrates a lamp that will correct a camera half a world away. Someone writes a line of code that will refuse to be fooled by star spikes, hot pixels, and dreams. Someone trains a model on ghosts so that ghosts stop frightening. Someone translates an advisory into a language that has few words for comet and many words for rain. Each small task lights a candle at the edge of a map. Together the candles make a shoreline. Occasionally a stranger crosses close enough to draw breath from the large rooms. It brushes attention with a texture that suggests other suns and other winters. Its path carries a slight extra curve that math can attribute to a breath of gas or to sunlight, learning a new leverage on something fragile. The watchers write what they can without romance. They test the explanations that do not require miracles. They let the last word remain open. The point is not to finish the mystery. The point is to make its edges firm enough to live beside. Guardianship does not end with deflection schemes and drill scripts. It extends into how a community handles knowledge and rest. Policies are crafted to grant access to data with speed and fairness. Budgets are argued for with a tone that avoids thunder. The memory of near misses and non-events is preserved so that future hands do not have to rediscover humility. The watch becomes an inheritance. Apprentices learn not only how to fit an orbit, but how to speak about it to a grandmother who wants to know if she should sleep near a window. The ledger, silent as it is, holds more than numbers. It holds portraits. A pebble that likely came from a disk, where planets were stacked too close. A chip that carries a skin of organics cured by long radiation. A flake that may be so light that sunlight holds a conversation with it as if with a feather. A small comet that woke only briefly and then slept again. These portraits are thinner than any museum's labels. They are enough. They make the galaxy feel less like a postcard and more like a neighborhood. One could say that a watch list is a list of danger. It is not. It is a list of invitations to keep courage small and steady. Courage here is not a charge. It is a willingness to let uncertainty coexist with chores. Keep the detectors cold. Keep the mirrors clean. Keep the channels open. Keep the drafts ready, in case words must be spoken. Keep curiosity alive when headlines wander elsewhere. Keep kindness in the cadence of updates that will mostly say, nothing happened. There will be seasons when the ledger thickens. A family of fragments will pass one after another, with paths that graze the quiet tolerance of the models. A bright stone will tumble and show a face that makes spectra briefly sing. A radar echo will return that is so crisp it feels like a handshake. These seasons will pass. Their residue will be a stronger habit, a slightly different cadence, an extra bolt in a mount, a finer mesh in a filter. The sum of changes will not look dramatic. It will feel like assurance. In the far view, the project is not about stones at all. It is about learning to live with a sky that is active and indifferent. It is about measuring without grabbing, deciding without staging panic, and improving without courting perfection. It is about an affection for the world that expresses itself in clean data and honest thresholds. The watchers do not keep a planet safe by force. They keep it safe by refusing to be surprised when surprise is avoidable. That refusal is a kindness practiced towards strangers they will never meet. At some dawn, a technician will unplug a test lamp and watch the last image of the night compress into an archive. The graph on the screen will flatten into the calm that says all the small storms stayed offshore. The quiet will feel earned. The ledger will accept a new page with a few clean lines and a note that reads follow-up complete. It will look like nothing. It will be everything. In that moment, the sky will be large, the planet will be small, and the distance between the two will hold a bridge woven from patience. The bridge does not gleam. It does not draw tourists. It does not ask for first names. It simply allows crossings. Across it move stones that did not know we were watching, and a species that learned to look without blinking. If love has a place in such work, it is not in the ornament of words. It is in the staying. Lenses stay cold. Codes stay precise. Voices stay measured. Eyes stay on nights that most will sleep through. This is how a world is kept. Not by vows to triumph over the heavens, but by tending the ledger and keeping the watch. Wind down. A slow hush falls across the domes. Frost gathers on the rails like thin lace. The telescopes rest with their pupils turned inward, mirrors dimming under soft covers of night air. Far above, a dozen stones keep their quiet courses, each no larger than a memory, each carrying a history that does not require an audience. The planet turns, and with it turns the basin of warm seas, the glimmer of cities, the darkness between homesteads where dogs lift their muzzles and listen to sounds too faint to count. The watch continues even when nothing announces itself. Servers hum with a steadiness that mimics tide. Scripts run, save, compress, and sleep. In the morning, a few new lines will appear in the ledger. Most will belong to visitors who brush past and never return. A handful will receive the small mark that means ask again. Somewhere a child will wake in a house that looks exactly as it did the night before. The kitchen window will glow. A cereal spoon will click. Outside, a contrail will unravel into nothing. Safety looks like this. What the watchers guard is not the end of surprise. It is the shape of days. It is the chance to keep language gentle, to let gardens mature, to allow plans to persist. They serve a planet that never promised them attention in return. That is the beauty of it. The work is its own reward. A clean fit, a mitigating call made on time, a public note that says, with informed calm, that the sky will be kind today. Then the kind day arrives, and no one notices that kindness has machinery behind it. If a stranger from the dark edges should cross nearer 1 year, the net will be ready. Eyes will gather the faint and make it firm. Minds will compare the tiny forces that curve a path, and hands will send the instruments that can touch gently or push lightly as the numbers instruct. Until then, the world sleeps under a patient catalogue written in small type. The catalogue is not a covenant, it is a craft. It is how attention learns to love without drama. The night deepens. The domes breathe. The ledger waits for the next line, and the next line waits for the same simple thing as every dawn. Light. End of script.